Curriculum Committee to order. The committee would like to welcome the audience. Viewers may watch live board committee meetings online at tcaps.net/board, and recorded meetings may be viewed on demand at the same address. The committee has set aside this time for public comment. It appears we do have public comment. Kelly?
Yes, Diane Arnold, topic calendar.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Great. So individuals addressing the board shall have one opportunity to speak during public comment and shall be limited to 3 minutes. Individuals should not make personal attacks unrelated to actions affecting the school system. We strongly encourage common courtesy and constructive feedback. Detailed rules and procedures, including a complaint process, are outlined in Board Policy 2504. With that, please feel free, Ms. Arnold.
All right. My name is Diane Arnold, and I first want to thank you guys for all the hard work that you put in. I know it's a thankless job and unpaid, and I really truly appreciate all that you do for our children in our community. I do have thoughts on our school calendar for next year, and I'm a working mom of 3 elementary school children. My husband has a very high demanding job as well. My children are in kindergarten and 2nd grade at Eastern and a 4th grader at Central grade. So we have difficulty navigating 2 schools with elementary school. Obviously, they're too young to really be home alone and to be getting to and from school by themselves. And so that in and of itself is one difficult thing to navigate. And then add into it the addition of early release and half days that we've had this past year that seemed more than normal and maybe not as regular as normal has made it much more difficult for our family in particular. And I have spoken to other families. I know my family is not alone. It appears we've had 12 of them, not including holidays or snow days, which does affect learning continuity. It affects the teachers. It affects scheduling. How can they make sure that they're getting all the things that they need? Additionally, one interesting thing in terms of professional development, I know how important that is. These teachers need that professional development. It's something you have to build into your curriculum, to your calendar. But we want to make sure that it's as constructive as possible, and putting that professional development at the end of the day is not the most productive. I have spoken to several teachers who have said at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, whatever time that they are scheduled for that professional development, they're already exhausted. They've already had a nearly full day with 30 children, 25 children, whatever it is. I know even just working in my job by 3 o'clock, I'm ready for another cup of coffee. So putting it at a different time, putting it all together, making it a really constructive time for professional development is really important. I would propose to eliminate the shortened days, make it better for teachers, families, and really just have a common sense approach to it. Knowing families are going out of town on these days, we can try to connect days to days off, or holidays to days off, so we don't have the MLK issue that we had this year. And if there's no other option, if we have to have shortened days, let's make sure we have expanded childcare options through our school system, because it does put families in a difficult position. And I worry that there are many families who are leaving children home alone. There are latchkey kids that maybe shouldn't be, and it becomes a safety issue. And then since I'm the only one, I'm just going to throw one other thing in here that I've been wanting to send an email about. My 4th grader.
Time's up, ma'am. I'm so sorry. Dang it.
Okay, I'll send an email.
That would be great.
Thank
Can I
you.
ask that we extend the time? Can I ask for that?
You would have to do for all meetings moving forward with that. If you're gonna do that policy.
Because
you'll have
it
Please
to have-
follow up with an
That's the
email to the
reason
full board.
No problem.
that
Thank
we-
you.
Yep, thank you.
It
You can
helps.
address us
And
individually
I do
or just do
hear-
schoolboard@tcaps.net.
Okay.
I'll be in board hours this Thursday
Okay.
at the library.
Okay.
Be happy to hear.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
And I am not going to be able to stay for the full meeting.
That's fine. You are dismissed.
Okay. Have a good day, everybody.
All right, thank you. Okay. So we are at the procedural items portion of the the agenda. First up is the draft committee meeting minutes from January 28th. Are there any changes to the minutes?
No.
No.
Okay, all right then, hearing no changes, the minutes will remain as posted. Next up, we are gonna talk about our 2024 to 2025 TCAPS district course catalog updates, and I will hand over to Ms. Jessie Horton.
Yeah, good morning. Just a few courses. This is probably now the rhythm that we're in as the semester changeover. So you'll see they're all virtual courses or they are NMC courses. So sometimes it's a renaming of a course, sometimes it's a new course that we haven't had students enrolled in before. But that's what all of these courses that you see here are. And remember, the ACL stands for Acellus. That's the online platform that we are using over at the Compass Learning Center and at Traverse City High School.
I was just curious about the ACL college exam math prep. Is that for the CLEP exam or what?
No, that's a course for some of our students who are, because remember, Traverse City High School operates under an alternative education waiver through the state, so we can educate students for 2 additional years, right? So we do get some of our students coming back. Maybe they're 20 or 21, really still looking to earn their high school diploma. We have found that a few of those kids mathematically, we still are not gonna reach 18 credits with them because they've either spent a long enough time out of school and didn't earn the credits. But we're happy they're back and they're re-engaging, and so some of that coursework actually prepares them to take the GED.
Okay.
But it also counts for high school math credit under the they need 4 credits to graduate. It counts as that 4th year. The first 3 are prescribed by Algebra 1 Geometry and Algebra 2, and that 4th credit will be included under that. And so some of those students, we realize they're gonna age out, but we also wanna make sure that they're ready for the next opportunity, which in their case is the GED. So we found some courses in Acellus that will help us with that.
Is it just me, or does that name college exam math prep a little bit of a strange name given that explanation? But I appreciate that it's high school
Yeah, but it might
graduation.
also prepare them for the AccuPlacer, right? That's what NMC gives to place in like a lot of our, like Lansing community and Grand Rapids community. So it's not just that. In this particular case, there's 2 students in particular that Jen reached out and said, Jess, this is the situation we're in. We haven't really done GED prep in the past because we really want kids to earn a high school diploma through us. But these students, it's a unique situation. So she said, hey, can we add this? And I looked at it and I said, yeah, actually we totally can. And for a student who maybe is going to a community college and wants to prepare for the AccuPlacer, which is what they typically use to place kids, yeah, it's good too. So
You can take classes at NMC without your diploma.
correct. Yep.
How long can you do that?
How many classes you can take? I don't know what the answer
And
to that
I'm
is.
wondering, what they can apply to a degree through NMC, if you don't have your diploma.
High school diploma, yeah.
Mhm.
You can, and
Just be an
it might
interesting
depend
thing.
on what coursework it is, right? And where that falls, I would guess. So.
And whether you want actually a degree out of it.
And I think, you have a whole lot of beginning level courses that are remedial that you have to do to be able to get to that next step. So I know it's possible, but awfully hard.
Yeah, it'd be kind of interesting to see the linkage.
Ms. Houghton, I also had a question about the middle school,
Mhm.
because these are Michigan virtual
Yeah.
courses for music, which I thought was interesting. So why would a middle school student take that? Is it like they're looking for another elective, they can't fit into their schedule, so they elect to
This student in particular is fully remote. They're a fully virtual student, and it's due to homebound situation actually. And they are just looking for an elective. And this is a student who has a high interest in music. We've never had a middle school student. We found it, and one of the middle school principals was like, "What do you think about this? This is where the kid's really interested." And I was like, "Yeah, sure. I mean, it makes sense. Course-wise, if they were in person, they wouldn't have a conflict. There's not as many conflicts at middle school just because the way we schedule there. Plus,
Excellent.
Thank you. Mentioning this for our art students who are trying to go to Interlochen, that's actually an option for them because they do offer Michigan Virtual during the summer.
Yeah.
Cool.
Is it, and I'm curious, is it possible for a kid, middle school or high school, to take an extra elective virtually, even if they're paying for that credit? How does that work?
Sure, if families want to do above and beyond, Michigan Virtual tends to be the platform that we use, similar to the summer. Like if I want to accelerate my student, I can pay for it through Michigan Virtual, and then we take the credit and the grade onto the student's transcript.
Mhm.
Yep.
Do you know what the cost is per credit?
Depends a little bit on what the course is, and remember too, there's semesters. It's somewhere between $400 and $600 a semester for a
Okay.
course.
Great, any other discussion? No, okay. Well then, I think we'll move that on to the board, if everybody's comfortable, consent calendar.
Yep.
Okay, great, with that, next up on the agenda is the Elementary English Language Arts, CKLA, materials purchase. I will defer to Mr. Dan Tisworth and Ms. Brittany King.
Yeah, so just to give a quick summary of the request memo and also what it's looked like over the past 2 years. So we started this, I was actually at East Middle last year when this started in the elementary school, but the idea of looking at that our Journeys curriculum was gonna come to the end of their contract, an 8-year contract. Definitely had some issues with that curriculum and how it was launched and ended up not meeting necessarily all the standards that we wanted it to meet. We ended up doing quite a bit of supplementing with that curriculum. So last year they looked at several options, got a committee together, vetted a lot of curriculum, and then landed on CKLA to start with our early adopters. So this year we've had around two teachers in each elementary school, be around 20-ish, 22 teachers that have been looking at the CKLA and actually teaching it throughout the year, giving us feedback and going through training. So at this point, with the memo, it's mapped out that we'll be looking at purchasing CKLA starting next year, looking at a 5-year program. Cost comes in about 1.1 to 1.2 million. And that cost currently would be covered by a state grant of 35J.
So I just had a question about the Journeys curriculum, and I moved here when that was pretty new to TCAPS, and my own kids went through elementary school using Journeys. Whatever the limitations were, the shortcomings for the district on that, what could you summarize what the specific issues were, and then how with a new curriculum TCAPS will overcome those same limitations?
Yeah, I can summarize the shortcomings. I think when Brittany goes through the next part of the learning series, it kind of explains CKLA and how it's actually mapped out. That might answer more of the questions or where those holes will be filled. So I was at Westwoods when Journeys came in. So I was my second year at Westwoods. My first year, we actually piloted CKLA. So we're going back quite a few years now. The district decided not to adopt CKLA, even though that's the program that our ISD supports and continues to support. So that was hard right off the get-go, right? Where we have several people within our ISD that have literacy coaches that come in to help support curriculum, and that they've been a big part of our adoption process now and will be a big part of it moving forward. That support was available, but it was not streamlined at all, right? They're coming in to support a different. We're also going to talk about, and I know this has been part of board curriculum before, as well as board meetings, about the science of reading, right? And having a program, and now that if you've looked, some legislation coming through and some more grants coming through the state, that they're going to support more of our literacy as long as your curriculum is based in the science of reading. And with Journeys, we don't necessarily see that. And then moving through the Journeys program, there wasn't, I believe, to start out with, we didn't have organized PD with the immense amount of materials that Journeys has. Journeys, I believe, has more resources than CKLA, and trying to sort out when to use those and how. Once that's gone, I mean, you can lose a curriculum, and I saw this with Journeys within the first year, if not less. Because once people are not, if they're not trained and they're not sure how to use it, then it's supplement city, right? They know what their kids need to know, right? We have fantastic teachers here in TCAPS, And they'll do anything to make sure that those kids hit those standards, and if they don't feel like the program's hitting the standards and they don't have support, they'll find another way to do it. Right, which we're super conscious of moving forward with CCALA. Like we know some of these mistakes that we've made with journeys, and those are holes that we're definitely gonna fill as far as front loading PD, making sure we have materials in teachers' hands, making sure like they have the e-files so they can get on the electronic version of CCALA this year to kind of start to ease that transition.
Okay. And I know this has been a long process.
Mm-hmm.
You described the pilot process for a few years. Are there other districts in Michigan that TCAPS does have some familiarity with in terms of moving from journeys to CKLA?
I was just gonna say, not necessarily with a journeys transition to CKLA, but as far as districts that are using CKLA, Brittany and I have reached out to several districts about the implementation plan. When we talk specific schools, West Auburn.
We talked to Rockford Public and Wyoming Public Schools.
And I think Kingsley uses CCALA.
Kingsley
All of
uses
the
it.
rest of the IC.
Yeah.
And the rest of the IC.
And
We were
it's,
specifically looking for schools at our size, right? When we have 11 elementary schools, our ISD doesn't necessarily replicate that as far as individual district scope. So if we look at a big district and we look about the districts that have associate superintendents or chief of academics or a curriculum director, right? And how did they bring this to scale throughout their elementary schools when they have more than 2, right? And we're talking about larger districts that have 8 to 10 elementary schools. There's a lot that goes into the professional development, but there's a whole lot to make this successful that goes into the logistics, the materials. How do we get those to teachers? You know, how do we store them, all those things.
My big question is, when I was talking to some kids, and granted it was only 5, their feeling was they didn't care for journeys because it really wasn't that interesting. And when you have a not very interesting reading program, that's not cool. I don't think from the student standpoint. So hopefully, when you were looking at CKLA, you were asking the students, you know, do you care? Do you, is this interesting? Do you look forward to the material? Because I think there has to be some of that, because you have to engage your audience.
Yeah, 100%. I agree, and that's probably the one thing when I visited classrooms, as far as, and Brittany and Miss Mapes will also discuss as she taught the curriculum, right? Is the feedback we would get, probably the best feedback we got was engagement. That the kids were excited to learn the material, and once obviously they're excited to learn the material, then you can teach other aspects of the curriculum. So that was our number one. And another nice thing that it does that I think in particular you might be interested in is that how it incorporates our science and social studies curriculum, right? And gets kids excited about social studies.
And hopefully a little bit about math. There's, well,
We try.
You can weave it in, and you can make it fun. You really can.
Yes, we can.
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
So we'll go to,
That's right.
I'm gonna turn over to Brittany and Danielle as far as going through kind of what the whole process has looked like and why CKLA.
Excellent, thank you.
So we'll start out with just defining what a high quality ELA program looks like. And so there is an exorbitant amount of research out there that helps districts better ensure that they are selecting high quality ELA programs to be utilizing to put in front of students. But for the purpose of our time today, I pulled the research that was done through the Institute of Education Sciences, and then the Reading League, which is a nonprofit organization that is really kind of guiding the science of reading work on a national level. They really synthesized a multitude of research to create a curriculum evaluation guideline that is being utilized across the nation to ensure that curriculum adoption processes have the tools to vet curricular ELA curriculum. And so kind of synthesizing the research that came through there, or those 2 pieces of research, really lands on assuring that a high quality ELA program is aligned to the science of reading and our Common Core state standards, that there is intentional, systematic, and explicit instruction, particularly in foundational reading skills, that clear scope and sequence that really is intentional about following that progression, building from more simple skills to more complex skills. And then the builds background knowledge using rich and complex text. And I think this is a really key piece that in previous curriculum or curricular resources, we haven't really seen such an intentionality. And it's really important to think about the impact that background knowledge has because it is one of the strongest factors in building equitable instruction for all. We can't assume that students are coming with all the background knowledge necessary to engage in reading, and so that high quality ELA program has to be really explicit and intentional about building that in. We want to make sure that the ELA program has those ample opportunities for judicious and deliberate practice as well as integrated academic conversations. And then, of course, we want to make sure that the assessments that are aligned within that program are tied to those standards that have been explicitly taught, so that when teachers are reviewing that assessment data, they are really able to discern what the impact of that instruction was and how I can continue to remediate those skills if students haven't mastered it by the time that instruction has concluded. So what does this mean for CKLA? So why CKLA? And so I want to direct you to the graphic you see on the right. This is a snip from Ed Reports, and Ed Reports is a nonprofit national organization that vets curricular resources. And this is the report that you see for CKLA, and they vet those curricular resources through 3 gateways, one being text quality, one being building knowledge, and then one being usability. And so as you can see from kindergarten through 5th grade, CKLA meets expectations across all gateways. And as Dan spoke earlier, we went through a curricular adoption program starting last year, leading into this year, that resulted in the selection of CKLA, mainly because it was a program that was really built on the science of reading, not necessarily retrofitted, which I'll get into a little bit later during this learning series. CKLA also has strong results in the elements tied to high quality ELA materials using Ed Reports, which you see on the right, as well as the Reading League's curriculum evaluation tool and the Knowledge Matters campaign. I think the other key element, at least for the curriculum adoption team, is that this program was highly aligned with explicit instruction and the science of reading, both of which were focal points of the district for the 23-24 school year last year, as well as the 24-25 school year this year.
Explain to me really quickly. You don't have to explain the science of reading, but what is explicit instruction?
Yeah, so explicit instruction is a framework that comes from Dr. Anita Archer and Charles Hughes, and essentially it is a way to provide instruction that really focuses on high yield instructional practices. So how are we pulling out and providing clarity for our students on the critical content we want them to learn? It really encompasses that gradual release of responsibility of that explicit modeling to that guided practice to then that independent release, and embedding those consistent opportunities to respond in terms of student engagement.
I can see that in the sciences. It's hard for me to understand that in reading, because reading is a different process, I think, and how you actually reach the variety of students you have in the classroom is so important. And I think invoking curiosity a lot of times is part of it, and interest. And, you know, to me, I don't think of it as a science. I think of it as a connection.
So I think that's an important kind of concept or statement to address. And so I think in terms of reading instruction, it's a balance of both. And you'll see that in a little bit. So there are elements of reading that we need to make sure we are explicitly teaching to students, particularly with the foundational skills, but then invoking that curiosity really comes through that building of background knowledge and that engagement with those rich content and complex texts.
Science falls more into the writing. How do you construct, you know, your ideas so that they flow? But reading is really getting into a curiosity. You want to turn the page. You want to make sure you find an answer.
Yes.
It sounds like you're saying, though, there is some evidence-based research on explicit instruction for reading.
Yeah, I would even go a step backwards before the curiosity reading part begins, right? Where we go back to that pre-reading or teaching kids how to read. And I think that's where more of the science of reading comes in, right? When we look about phonemic awareness and phonics and those things, before we kind of get into more of the curiosity, turn the page background knowledge. I think that's still important in earlier grades, But I think in particular, and what Brittany will cover is that there's that part that's before that, that's, I mean, essential, right? That's the part where either a kid gets behind or doesn't, right? In those
Right,
first few years.
that's kindergarten, first
Yeah.
grade, I think.
I just had a question. I know our teachers got the professional development this year on science of reading. Have they gotten it on explicit instruction as well?
Yes, we've been doing it quite a few different years now.
Okay,
Blair and Trevor Sites have been on that trail for about 5 years.
yeah. So
But
we're
then
really ready to
others
hit the
pick it
ground
up.
running then with
Yes.
this. Great.
Yes. So in kind of continuing this, Dan spoke a little bit, but just to give you some further details regarding kind of the structure of the CKLA pilot early adoption process this year. So we had two teachers from our elementary schools engaged not only in initial training, but more of that ongoing support. So really moving past that one and done training, but that intentionality in bringing those pilot teachers back together and monitoring that implementation of that resource. Which involved those non-evaluative visits and then some structured calibration days with our Amplify support team, and Amplify is the publisher of CKLA, and our TCAPS curriculum and instruction team. We were really intentional about ensuring that we were collecting feedback through continuous loops with monthly Google Form surveys. We had informal check-ins with Dan and myself as we're really trying to be intentional in being in buildings on at least at minimum a monthly basis and checking in with our CKLA pilot teachers, and then those formal discussions during those calibration days as well. Another element we've added in is our structure of build and report outs. So our CKLA pilot teachers are reporting out to their building sites during a staff meeting, which started in January of last month, and we have 2 more in March and May. And the intent of that is to share collective successes, really explicitly lay out the connections to district initiatives, as well as talking about the teacher and student experiences so that our non-pilot teachers who are not engaging in the pilot process right now start to have some of that awareness ahead of full implementation moving into next year. So CKLA, kind of a high-level overview, CKLA is a program that embeds explicit systematic skills instruction. And so, Beth, to your point earlier, our students, about 40% of students across the world need systematic explicit instruction to be able to acquire those foundational skills necessary for reading. They have intentional knowledge building that comes not only within grade levels, but across grade levels. So for example, in kindergarten, students will engage in learning about plants before learning about animals, and then they'll learn about taking care of our earth, which will then go into first grade, where they'll apply that knowledge in a new domain called animals and habitats. And then they'll move into second grade and talk about cycles of nature. So really, like I said, that intentional knowledge building, not only within the grade levels, but really thinking about that vertical alignment of knowledge as well as they move through the course of their elementary schooling experience. There is those opportunities for that daily writing connected to reading, which is quite a shift than we've seen in years past, where we are asking students to write about their own personal experiences and assuming that everyone has an equal opportunity to personal experiences, but really leveling the playing field in terms of ensuring that that writing is directly connected to those topics and high interest topics that they're reading about in their class. There is the incorporation of those high quality diverse texts that range not only from complex read alouds, but to decodable texts that are really incorporating those shared experiences, not only from a national view, but a global view as well. There's the incorporation of opportunities to differentiate at multiple levels. So not only the remediation piece, but how are we providing extension and challenges for our students who are ready to take that next step. And then, as I spoke earlier, and as you saw with the Ed Reports results, it is also a program that is research-based and proven effective as well. Yes.
Question. I got raised my hand. So it's still there. So for the daily writing, and I think that's fantastic. Are kids, at what level do kids go from script writing or handwriting to typing?
Can you ask that one more time? I'm sorry.
At what level or what age or what grade do kids go from like handwriting to writing on the computer?
I would generally say we most commonly, and Danielle, feel free to speak about this as well. I would say we most commonly see that transition becoming a little bit more fluid around grade 3. I think in second grade, we start to see a little bit more integration, but that we really see more of that starting in 3rd grade and then moving into 4th and 5th. Would you be in agreement with that?
I would be.
So no longer 7th grade keyboarding. Okay, no,
No,
that's good to
no.
know. I have noticed like a sort of a decline in student handwriting for, and I know we've all seen that because of computers, but I'm hopeful that they'll continue to write too.
Is it okay if I say something?
Yes.
I think that's something that our kindergarten teachers were very skeptical about because they do a lot of pre-writing strategies in the kindergarten program. They don't enter right away into letter formation. And so the kindergarten teachers were coming to this pilot program with a lot of skepticism. And it was really amazing to hear their results. And they said that they have never seen students with as fine handwriting as this cohort of children have. So I hope that helps a little bit.
What's interesting is in the pre-K kids, at the beginning of the year, they can't print their names. They can't do, if they even get a first letter, that kid's advanced. But then by the end of the school year, they can all print their names. Now we're a long ways from writing our names, but they can print their names, and you can usually
Writing in
recognize-
cursive.
Yeah, and do we teach cursive? Is the question. Do we encourage cursive?
So in CKLA, there is a cursive supplemental packet that is available to teachers starting in grade 3 as an additional piece that teachers can leverage to bring in so that we are continuing to develop those fine motor skills beyond just the print and more into cursive. So right now, that is an optional resource. It's not something that is naturally embedded into the scope and sequence of that program, but it is available for teachers should they so choose.
So they would do that individually within the grade?
They would, yes. Primarily because in 3rd grade and beyond, handwriting is not a standard that is generally covered beyond grades K and 1.
I don't want to sidetrack us on cursive, but maybe we can talk about that another day.
Yes.
Because I do remember the last legislative session passed something about that, but I'm not up to date on what the
I don't believe it
requirements are.
passed, I think it was introduced.
Oh, okay, so it did not ever become law. Okay, well
Well,
then,
it's more of a science writing thing
Yeah.
to me, because it's really for certain writers versus all of them now.
well, Trustee Huber brought up an excellent question about the typing. I hadn't thought about that, but what I was gonna say is I do remember the daily writing connected to reading. Just, this goes back years, I mean, like maybe 5 years, where I remember Kate Burwinkle came here and talked about how that was like one of the limitations of journeys. Our kids weren't, and then we had the district, I can't remember if I was on the board at that time, but
We did a grant
we had
for
to
writing.
like
Supplement.
acquire the supplement
Correct.
for writing, and that's, to me, that's so important because, if kids are getting into high school and they're starting to use AI and they don't know how to write an essay, but we're building the blocks at the elementary level that they can write, that's just foundational.
And that's what I think we're trying to be a little more, I think fiscally responsible, right? If we're gonna, like Journeys was also over $1 million, I don't know the actual 1 point whatever, right? But we don't wanna have purchase a curriculum for $1.2 million and then supplement it and continue to buy more, right? In CKLA, we won't have to do that. Right? That's obviously we looked into that as far as what the writing looks like and the strength that we knew with Journeys, like we're still doing now. We're still spending money on Journeys with a curriculum that we spend a lot of money on.
We'll just have to keep buying consumables.
Well, the 1 point, that initial cost covers everything.
Really?
Yep,
Yes.
that's the whole curriculum for 5 years. That
Okay.
includes all the consumables.
Okay.
All right.
So I spoke earlier regarding that CKLA is not a program that was retrofitted to the science of reading, but it was built on components of the science of reading. And so if you were to look up anything related to the science of reading, there are 2 main theoretical frameworks that generally present themselves. And one is the image that you're looking at, and it's called Scarborough's reading rope. And essentially what this reading rope is it's a visual metaphor that really shows the necessary skills that need to be developed in order to ensure that skilled reading, which is that ultimate goal. And so as you can see, this breakdown is we have that language comprehension that's at the top part of our rope, and more oftentimes than not, we refer to that as being biologically primary because our brains are wired to acquire language regardless of whether or not that is being explicitly taught. And then that bottom part of that reading rope is related to word recognition, which we call that biologically secondary, because those skills need to have explicit and systematic instruction in order for kids to become automatic with being able to recognize sounds, that letters represent sounds, and that letters strung together form words. And so as those skills become more increasingly strategic and increasingly automatic, that's going to be interwoven into that skilled reading. So if you really look at that left visual and kind of go from left to right, we're really looking at a continuum of learning from kindergarten through 5th grade and beyond. So in kindergarten and 2nd grade, you're going to see more of those strands being separated, that those students are working on those skill sets not integrated, but more so apart from one another. And then as we move through and get into our upper grade levels, we're going to start to see those skills become more interwoven as kids are switching from more of that reading to learning to read into that more of that reading to learn. And so CKLA has 2 strands in grades K2, the knowledge strand and the skill strand. That knowledge strand is going to be directly connected to the language comprehension. That skill strand is going to be directly connected to word recognition. And then in grades 3 through 5, you're going to start to see those strands being integrated. So they're going to come together to really refine and promote those skilled reading techniques. So to break that down even further, that knowledge and skill strand, like I said, is just in grades kindergarten through 2nd grade. That knowledge strand is a 60-minute block of time that really includes deepening, building and deepening that broad knowledge, ensuring that we're leveraging that oral language development of students, practicing vocabulary and context, and deepening the learning by writing. There's that second block of that skill strand that is also 60 minutes long, and that's where students are practicing hearing sounds, saying sounds, reading sounds, writing sounds, and then ensuring that they have daily opportunities to practice those skills in context through decodable readers. And in CKLA decodable readers, any passage we put in front of students is going to include sound spelling correspondences that have been explicitly taught to them. So we're not putting text in front of them and asking them to read with skills that we have not explicitly taught them previously. In grades 3-5, where we see more of that integrated approach, because 3rd grade is that first time that students are engaging that is a 120-minute block of time, so similar to K2, but they're not separate lessons. And then in grades 4th and 5th grade, we're going to decrease that allocation of time to 90 minutes. And this is where you, like I said, you're going to see more of that integrated instruction, particularly with complex text. You're going to see a shift of explicit instruction on the development of the pieces of code into a focus on morphology and vocabulary. And then that writing is going to be that continuation from grades K2, where we're really being intentional about ensuring that they're writing with a purpose. And as I spoke earlier, there are embedded opportunities for differentiation, both from a remediation and extension standpoint. So remediation we have built into daily lessons, and you can see that on the sidebar and that visual up at the top. There are also opportunities for 30 minutes of additional support in every skills lesson based on the assessments that are being administered. And teachers also have access to intervention toolkits to help remediate skills that have not been mastered. And we also, as a part of our quote, purchase Boost Reading, which is a personalized learning platform directly connected to the same concepts that students are engaging in within their whole group and small group instruction. And then from an extension standpoint, there are also opportunities built in as well, and you can see that in the indicated by the challenge up in that top visual. And our students will also receive those extensions through that Boost Reading platform as well, because they're engaging in skills that are at their level based on a placement test that they take when they first log into that Boost Reading platform.
And Boost Reading right now is as far as their quote goes, is 1 year. We really, because with that program, it's there are a lot of different programs we can use to supplement as far as having extra reading support, so doing it for a year and really gathering data. We got some good feedback from some pilot teachers about boost reading and its effectiveness, but we wanna not commit to it for 6 years, but for 5 years, but rather just do one, gather data around it and see if that's our best fit.
What do you do with the kids that are already moving ahead of where your instruction is?
That's where I think the Boost Reading platform is really advantageous because it's going to have them practice the skills that they are ready to develop. So I might have a 3rd grade student that is engaging in Boost Reading, and they might be practicing 4th or 5th grade skills, which is, I think, the huge benefit to that platform in particular, not only because it's connected to CKLA, but it allows us to meet the variance in needs that we generally see across a classroom.
And then the second question is, do you introduce formally grammar?
Yes. Grammar is a huge component within those skills lessons. So they not only will practice morphology and breaking apart those words and how prefixes and suffixes change the meaning of base words, but they will also engage in explicit teaching of components related to grammar.
Because I think that can be lacking
Yes.
in places.
And they're very fluid in terms of that explicit instruction in grammar and then how it's integrated into those daily writing lessons. So it's not grammar in isolation, but how are we leveraging those skills to improve our writing collectively as a whole?
Because I remember a good portion of 7th grade, diagramming sentences.
Oh, yeah.
You would not believe.
I remember,
We hit the wall with all.
this is urban, just would anchor down and diagram sentences for an hour.
Yes, sir.
Guess I blocked that out in my memory.
You wanna see an engagement issue with Dan.
When a sentence doesn't seem to be working, you fall back on looking at the grammar of it. Sometimes that really helps.
So I'm sure everyone's thinking, well, how do we know this works, right? How do we know that CKLA has actually been able to be proven to be effective across subsets of students? And so you're looking at 2 findings from nationwide research studies. And I'm gonna highlight, just for the sake of time, the one that is bordered in green. And so this was a study that was done out of UVA in Detroit across 9 elementary schools. And this was over the course of 4 years. And so what is beneficial about these 2 particular findings is they studied the result of the implementation of CKLA and its results specifically to the increase in test scores. So as you can see in finding 1, the treatment group who received CKLA versus the non-treatment group outperformed those students on all state reading tests with a statistically significant effect size of 0.47. So just what we know about effect size, and we want to target those high yield impact above that 0.4 that was statistically significant. And then in finding 2, they also studied those income-based achievement gaps. And so they recognized that this was a program that benefited all of their students. From those who came from high income areas, the effect size was 0.44, so still statistically significant, But in those low income areas, the effect size was almost triple the amount with a 1.299 effect size. So this program not only benefits all students, but particularly our students, or particularly students who come from low income areas.
I would like to talk to you about that later on, if I may.
That would be great.
So you said the 1.29% or 1.29, yeah.
1.299.
Effect size
Yep.
equals a 3-fold increase. What is the 0.44 amount to then?
So anything above a 0.4, we're gonna say has an impactful and that it has a high impact on student growth and achievement. And so
It's big.
yeah.
Remember the Hattie chart that we had with
Yes.
the point of all
It's
the
big.
decibels of the effect size?
Yeah.
So there's,
It-
there's,
it-
well,
The
there's.
book I gave you guys.
Okay.
Josie, there's like 2 things going on. Statistically significant just has nothing to do with those numbers on the screen. That just means that that group moved enough that they said this isn't just due to variation or whatever else. those effect size, what you're looking for, 0.4 means adequate growth, right?
Yeah.
A kid made adequate growth for a year. Anything that's above 0.4 means they made more than a year's worth of growth, right? So when you see 0.445, it's like, oh, it's not that much. No, that's more than a year's worth of growth, which is great. The best part about that, because when you're really talking about how our kids stuck kind of in that low achievement, low growth, is that 1.299, right? That means those kids made over a year's worth of growth, even more, which means they're closing that gap, right? Does that help?
Yeah. So this is national data
Correct.
and measuring growth year to year, averaging it for all K through 5?
Over the course of 4 years, and they're even continuously looking at data through 6th grade. So that long-term impact once students leave that elementary experience, how is that also impacting their secondary experience as well?
And these are
Same
like,
cohort of kids.
Same cohort of kids.
and these are like researchers collecting the data and vetting it and all that stuff. So like, we could show you, Brittany and I talked a little bit about looking at data from us. First of all, the research says you don't actually look at data right now during an adoption. It's pretty, it's like not really a great measure. But this type of stuff, right, is like, it's controlled, it's systematic, it follows all the things of how you conduct research in educational settings, so.
And I don't know if this is scientifically looked at as far as studies go, but if we look at, that achievement gap that we see, if we compare TCAPS, state, and the ISD, right? We do a better job than the state as far as closing that achievement gap. We have less. However, with our ISD, it's interesting with ELA that our achievement gap is a little more than the ISD, and some of that, again, I can't say it's scientifically for sure, but with the entire ISD using CKLA, it's interesting that in ELA in particular, right, we see that achievement gap a little less.
Okay.
What took us so long?
Couple
Money?
things, finance is a big part,
Money.
yeah.
Having the right players at the table, I mean, like, we adopt journeys and we wanted them to give it a good shot, right? We spent a lot of money on it. We thought it was the right decision. I think I must have been transitioning out of Westwoods when you're there, because I remember all of that too. And it came down to journeys or CKLA, and we had a hard time as a district trying to decide, we want to make the best decision always,
Sure. And then there were 2 programs you were looking at. CKLA was one of them, but there was another one, I forget its name.
And it was kind of split. It was part of one, part of another, which is one thing I wasn't in love with, in that way. But after the pilot of other teachers, it was decided to use CKLA.
And I think there's a lot to be said for our ISD support.
Yeah.
Keeping that fluid, that the entire ISD, right, our 5 counties are doing this, and their support structures in ELA are set up around CKLA. It just makes for that transition super smooth.
But they're still lagging behind in reading and math. I mean, we're not.
No, not arrived by any means.
Yeah, we got a long ways to go.
Mhm.
I think to your point, it just shows that this is so much more than just a curriculum adoption, right? We're actually fundamentally asking teachers to reevaluate the way in which they've always provided literacy instruction, which is very different from what we've historically done to what the science of reading is saying in terms of what is most effective. So it's a combination of multiple things that are playing against each other, which makes it a really complex change to engage in.
And you're running into kids that because they've been on screens from such early age, they have no patience. And it's hard to get them into it.
Is it fair to say then that the science of reading has also really evolved then, or emerged in the last 8 years since TCAPS first adopted?
I would say it's gotten more of a spotlight. So it's actually been around for about 50 years, but it has never really gained the traction as it has within the last handful of years, especially at a national level.
There was a real philosophical difference of philosophical approaches of some reading, of whole language versus phonics. And there were districts all over the place in different spots, and you had different approaches to it. And so, it's really finally came, full circle to phonics as that element that's within building the science of reading and really abandoning that concept of the whole language concept that our state and and everybody's moved away to that. But there were, even when my time at the State Department of Ed, I can tell you, we had factions within the department that were pushing each side, and it caused some real confusion.
The whole word thing is more an older mind, I think. The phonics, you watch kids build a word using phonics.
I think I recall you saying something like, stuff that is finally accepted at a state level takes 10 years to implement. And I think we've referred to science of reading.
Yeah.
at that point.
It was a real battle with, believe me, I mean, literally almost fistfights within the department, I remember, over, just 100% diametrically opposed philosophically the way to do it. And I think that, the research has now shown that the phonics element is the way to go with it, and that's what people are now, state resources, everything getting behind that finally after 2 decades of battle.
I was gonna say, you were at the state, MDE
I was.
15 to 20 years ago?
I've been gone for 13 years now.
Yeah, all right. Well,
Good
that's very,
choice.
the finding number 2, I mean, both findings, finding 1 and 2 are impressive. I would say finding 2 is really a surprise to me, a pleasant surprise. So anyway, I don't wanna, slow you down here, but just wanted to note that, because I mean, basically, what we're talking about here as a district is adopting this, and would we have the same expectation of student growth as shown here? Is that,
Yes,
yeah.
we would.
And I think the key point is this is over 4 years' time, right? It's not an expectation this is gonna happen overnight within 1 year, that it actually takes, a plan that is really intentional about the monitoring and supporting our staff and students, so that by the, 4 or 5 years, we're starting to see some similar results as well.
What are we gonna do for the kids that are gonna get out before you start seeing results? The kids that are 5th graders now that are struggling with reading.
Well, we got a plan for them too, Beth. Don't worry. That'll be the next
That's in
board.
the works.
Brittany and I have been talking about that. Don't worry.
Okay, good.
So what does this look like in terms of our actual pilot teachers' data and their perception regarding student impact? So we surveyed our pilot teachers and received 18 responses. In lieu of not having that student achievement data, just because of what implementation science says to be effective of the do's and don'ts of pilots. And so on the top 2, you're going to see an effectiveness rating on a scale of 1 to 4, 1 being least effective, 4 being most effective. And that first image in that top left is how effective do you find CKLA in supporting students' foundational literacy skills? So you're seeing that representation being very high in terms of highly effective through the lens of our pilot teachers. And then in the one that is just to the right of that, on a similar scale, how effective do you find CKLA in supporting students' language comprehension? So both of those sides of Scarborough's rope. And you also see a high effective rating with regards to language comprehension as well. That bottom left, and then we've talked about it a little bit already, but how does student engagement during CK lessons compare to previous years with our prior literacy curriculum? And as you can see, we're also on that higher effective side as well. And then that last piece is what percentage of students demonstrate improved literacy skills since implementing CKLA based on local assessments. And what we mean by local assessments are those embedded assessments within CKLA that are measuring student progress and mastery on skills that have been explicitly taught. And so that 55 and 33% say we have about 89% of our pilot teachers saying that we have about 51 to 100% of our students who are seeing improved literacy skills based on those assessments that they've been administering within the program.
The N is, of course, very small, 18 responses.
Yes.
And we had, 26 that were receiving materials in the pilot project, from what I think.
We have 20. So we have 2 from 10 of our elementary schools. Montessori did not participate during this pilot year.
That's interesting.
But we've set up a system for them to also meet with our Amplify support team with a support rep who specializes in implementing CKLA in a Montessori school setting. So we're working to develop an implementation plan that aligns with the Montessori teaching philosophy while utilizing the same resources that the rest of the district will be utilizing moving into next year as well.
I just had a question about the teachers who rated CKLA's effectiveness as a 3, or the top left, the one person who selected number 2. If this was an anonymous survey, that makes it more challenging, but were you able to reach those teachers and say, hey, what is it exactly, and what more can we do, or what more can CKLA do, to just get behind why they felt it was less effective?
Yeah, so I can speak to the one rating for the number 2. It came from an upper L classroom, and that becomes difficult because within CKLA and how it's currently structured, all pieces of the code will be taught by the conclusion of 2nd grade. So when we are working to more intentionally remediate those huge gaps we're seeing in some of our upper L students, that CKLA program, if you were to just use that program just with it from a tier 1 standpoint, it is not going to be explicitly teaching those foundational reading skills in our upper L grade level. So we have to look to pull out those additional remediation components within that program to help mitigate some of those gaps we're seeing. So I think moving forward, it's just ensuring that teachers are aware of those resources that are embedded within to help fill those gaps while still providing that grade level tier 1 instruction to the majority of the class.
And that's where the literacy coach probably comes in too, right?
Yes.
Sorry, Beth.
And you have kids moving into the district as well.
Yes.
Okay. And then in terms of those number 3s, the people who rated 3s, did you get a dialogue with them as well to see what more they might need to make feel that CKLA is fully effective?
I think just from our calibration days and the discussions, it's just needing more time. It is because it is a comprehensive program and such a switch from what they've historically implemented with Journeys in the past. It's taken time where most of them at this point, when we did our last calibration day in February, I think the overwhelming kind of response was, now I feel comfortable in being able to be confident in implementing and doing this program its due diligence. And so I think we'll start to see that shift a little bit more as people become a little bit more familiar and confident in implementing that curricular resource.
Yeah, I just think those numbers would continue. If you kept this cohort and surveyed them year after year, we would see those numbers all shift towards the 4s. I mean, next year is going to be it's a comfort level with the curriculum.
Sure.
I mean, just the pacing and the time that's committed to the program, it's a shift in how you teach. And that in and of itself, I think, and Danielle can speak to this, I think those first couple months were like, there was a lot probably as far as timing goes.
It was and it wasn't.
Yeah.
I felt, well, and I'll talk about it a little bit more, but I felt very comfortable. I felt like we had been given the tools that we needed. And I think having a positive mindset is the biggest thing. I think also recognizing that teachers are so hard on themselves like all of the time. So maybe you might be seeing that 3 as a reflection of just them being hypercritical of doing something new too, and recognizing that teaching is very personal. So just keeping all of that in mind too is important.
Good points. Thank you.
And then this last piece is through the lens of more of that adult impact. So as Dan and I have been working to really build a solidified implementation plan moving into next year, we wanted input on how effective was our current support plan for our CKLA pilot teachers. And so we also have the majority of our pilot teachers that we have responses from signifying that 3 and 4 as being highly effective. And then in terms of that ease of implementation and teacher usability, we have a little bit more variance in terms of that 1 is indicating a harder ease of implementation, and that 4 is indicating that easier ease. And so we have most of our responses on that 3 or 4 scale, with a couple being at that 2. And I think it is directly connected to what we've been kind of speaking to already thus far. And so I just kind of gave an overview of the quantitative data in terms of our CKLA pilot teachers group, and I'm going to pass it over to Danielle Mapes, who is one of our CKLA pilot teachers. She teaches in a 3-4 split classroom at Traverse Heights Elementary, and she's just going to talk about what she has seen in terms of an observable impact within her classroom.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. I could talk about CKLA and language arts all day, so very excited to finally have people who truly want to listen. Before I begin, I do want to mention the level of personal joy that I have found as a teacher with this program. As a lifelong learner, I wake up every morning just excited to go to work. This program has completely reinvigorated me with a thirst for both learning and teaching, and it has provided me with immense opportunities for instructional creativity. It has filled our entire building with a sense of excitement for what lies ahead. We are thrilled at Traverse Heights about the district's visions, and we're very hopeful that this content-based curriculum will help build a generation of well-rounded, curious, and astute thinkers. Along with my students, I began my year in CKLA on the riverbanks of the classic tale, The Wind in the Willows, and I will admit I had like a moment of hesitancy when I was very afraid that new routines and materials could totally throw my students for a loop. But our introduction to the new curriculum was met with safe entry points for all of my students, regardless of their learning levels or their language skills. Together we read, we reflected, and we wrote entire essays at a pace that I have never before been able to accomplish in a classroom. We celebrated our first unit with a friendship feast that my students still 4 months later talk about every single week. As a class, we have visited ancient Rome, we have sailed across the world in handcrafted Viking ships, we have performed scientific experiments in our light and sound unit, and we have embraced the role as taxonomists as we learned about animals. During our human body unit, students asked really deep questions about biology. We learned about disabilities, and perhaps my favorite takeaway was that all of my students developed a profound love of the musical likings of Stevie Wonder and Ray Charles. And this past Friday, we raced space capsules as we began our space unit. It has been a year of not only intense learning, but core memories. I'm really confident that my kids are going to carry with them everywhere they go for the rest of their lives. So those are just a handful of my own experiences. I also want to touch on a couple points. I really want to talk about the application of explicit instruction. I want to talk about the relationship between the science of reading and CKLA. And then I just want to talk about some anecdotal outcomes I've seen with my students' ownership of learning and classroom engagement in learning. So like Brittany has been talking about, CKLA is incredibly intentional about the use of explicit instruction. Explicit instruction is naturally embedded for a gradual release. There's easy adjustments for varying levels of scaffolding so that teachers can really meet the needs of their students. There's also a really clear calling out of primary focus objectives that are directly related to learning targets. And the daily routines create clear expectations for not only students, but teachers as well. It's also important to note that the ease of explicit instruction provides many opportunities within a lesson for students to respond in a multitude of ways. It allows teachers to give feedback and for students to give feedback to each other as well. And then there's just lots of different ways that students are constantly showing their learning. I think it's also important to discuss the relationship between CKLA and the science of reading. As we know, teachers have been receiving training from the Reading League, which has increased our knowledge about best practices in regards to students' oral reading fluency, comprehension skills, and writing. These trainings have given all teachers not only research-based information, but also a cohesive vision and clear expectations at a district level that we haven't had before. CKLA pilot teachers have noted that these practices are seen in CKLA material. They're not only explicit, but they also don't need to be altered in order to fit the Reading League's credentials for lesson plans. One item of feedback that was heard several times throughout our collaboration was that because of the program's unique and comprehensive planning, which is aligned with our current literacy initiatives, teachers no longer see a need to buy or use other supplemental materials. Speaking from my own experiences, I can say that this has given me more time to use student data and assessments in order to find pausing points within the program to really target any learning gaps that my students might have. Finally, I want to talk about student engagement because by far this was the most overwhelming commentary that we have received at each and every collaboration meeting. As a teacher who's used the previous curriculum, I got really used to just kind of hearing that unified sigh in my classroom when I would say, like, get out your language arts books, you know. And that hasn't happened this year, which is really exciting. I'm happy to report that students are not only engaged, but they're actually excited to begin our lessons every single day. I believe this high-level engagement has really attributed to improved absences, lessened behavioral conflicts within my class, and an improved school-home life connection. I have personally never had so many parent-teacher conferences where parents have been so knowledgeable and excited about the content that their kids are learning. I believe it's safe to say that through this curriculum, the trickle effect of learning is seen not only in our classroom, but also can be carried elsewhere in the community. And as somebody who is born in Traverse City, I can say that's just about, you know, the greatest gift that I can give to our students, our families, and our entire community.
Thank you. Terrific. Anything else?
Well, I just want to ask Danielle one question. Danielle teaches in that risk building, right? And she teaches in a split classroom and is using this. So can you comment at all on like challenges of having the 3-4 split and using CCALA?
Sure. I do think it's important to remember that we live in a really unique time where a third grade class, like we base that third grade class on their ages, right? And so just because a child is in third grade does not mean that they're always working or functioning at a third grade academic level. And I think that I feel very supported this year looking at data and figuring out where my kids need to be instead of just saying like, oh, they're in third grade, you have to learn the third grade content. And I think that this program, especially with my special ed students, has been incredibly helpful. I've been in close connection with the special ed teachers. It's interesting, I was in a meeting last week with someone from the ISD who said, oh, this is the first time I've been in a meeting here where we haven't had to majorly buy or do something different to support the special ed kids in the classroom. And that feels really cool to be kind of a part of that as we figure that all out. So does that answer your questions?
I'm just wondering about balancing the lessons, right? We always,
Yeah.
we know it's a challenge to
Yeah.
teach in a blended classroom environment. And how do you feel with this curriculum that's going and how do you balance that?
Yeah, I think teachers do what teachers do, right? I don't think it's been an overt challenge. I don't feel like I've been like, oh my gosh, I can't figure out a way to challenge my fourth graders, or I can't figure out a way to do that. I think we can teach up to the standards very easily. So we look at what we're provided in third grade for the standards, and third grade is very much an introductory year where fourth grade is a polishing year of skills. And so we can say, okay, the third graders, who are functioning at the third grade level might write 3 paragraphs, or my fourth graders are gonna write 5 or 6 paragraphs. And that's how I would adjust it. Does that make sense? Okay.
I'll also say that knowledge building across grade levels is really advantageous specifically for our split classroom. So because there's such that deep connection with the content that kids are engaging in, that creates a little bit more alignment as we move from grade level to grade level, particularly for our split classrooms.
Well, that leads to another question that's not on the agenda, and that is when you do split classrooms, do you get more of the high-end third graders and low-end fourth graders to mix in there to make the content work more smoothly?
Yeah, I
It's
think
not
that's building the
classroom.
building and how splits are formed based on just their classroom makeup, right? You could go from, that could be the case at Heights if they decide to split that way. But there's also splits that take place instead of, we just had that this past year, right, where they decided, they talked to teacher, gotten some input. They could have went into 3 overloads, they decided not to and do splits. And some of that's just behavior makeup also. So there's a lot that goes into it. When you determine a split, as far as some schools go, as far as there's some data involved, but they don't necessarily automatically go, I'm taking high third graders and low fourth graders and putting them together. Cause in theory, if you were to do that, your other two third grade classrooms that aren't split, when you take the high third graders off, the behavior in there is, right, it's sometimes not manageable. So I think splits are formed several different ways, but it goes back to, I think it goes back to the bigger discussion of like tier one instruction, right? And when we talk about explicit instruction in tier one, that is where our money is. That is where rubber hits the road, where we have our fantastic teachers doing this every single day. And now that we have a structure in place, right, we taught that the explicit instruction, you can put any curriculum on top of it you'd want to, but that's the how, right? That's what they're doing every single day. And now we have a system around it, right? We've done PD around it. We monitor it with instructional rounds. So we keep it in front of people. It's not, explicit instruction isn't like a flashy one-time program that education tends to always look for, right? Always want to find something that, hey, somebody's doing this out in Texas and paying $14 million for it, right? And it works. Well, it works as long as you can afford it. If you want to move the needle and you want to hit that 80%, that tier one, that every single kid in the district is tier one. So I just want to, as we talk about closing the achievement gap, and we talk about all these programs that we might try, or attendance incentives, or all this stuff, it comes back to, and no one's going to make like a fun action movie out of tier one. It's never going to happen. But that is it. That moves the needle. So that has always been our focus, and our CNI team is that we know that, right? We've been doing this long enough for, 30 plus years to understand that it takes time, but if you actually work with research-based, scientifically proven, data-backed up programs, it is gonna push, and that's what we've been trying to do.
Thank you.
Yeah, so PD plan, so just kind of planning out how do we make sure our teachers are supported. So it actually is gonna start it's actually been happening all year, right? The PD plan starts with our pilot teachers that are in staff meetings currently showing teachers about the program. Teachers are going in and observing classrooms of the pilot teachers also. Our last PLC that we have in April, all of our teachers are gonna have access to their teacher edition and also gonna have access to all the online materials. And we're gonna open that up a little bit in May, as far as, because when we do our first official PD in June, when we have people together, we wanna make sure they have some more exposure to the program so they know what questions to ask, right? Sometimes you come into a program, they don't know what they don't know, and the PD isn't as effective. So having that kind of opened up in May a little bit, so everyone's exposed to it. And then in June, we're gonna do 2 paid days where they can come in for a half a day, and a lot of that is obviously more exposure to the program, but also to take that tension off, right? That we don't know what we're coming into in August. Having those materials and a little bit of PD going into the summer for those that want to explore it further, I think is helpful as far as stress levels for teachers and what they're thinking about planning wise. And then when we come back in August, we do a leaders half day overview with our principals and our instructional coaches. We do a full day in August, so the whole Tuesday will be by grade level, where we have CKLA come in. November, our RSDD day, the AM of that will be again with CKLA coming back in. It's nice now that November touch point, now that they've actually taught for 6 to 8 weeks. Again, that idea of asking questions, how do we get past these hurdles? And then leader coaching sessions is also important. That can be supported by CKLA and also by our ISD. As far as the fidelity part in the program, right, when we talk about CKLA and how it's implemented and how quickly we can lose the reins on that, is that our admin, right, our 11 principals know that this is what to look for. This is what our coaches should be looking for when they go into the classroom to continue to help support. Furthermore, then we have our professional learning community, our PLCs this coming year. We'll have a structure more of a true PLC. It's kind of been intermittent PD over the last year. So those first 3 PLCs will be in a PLC format where you look at data, look at student work, incorporate instructional rounds, but that'll be around CKLA, the first 3. The next 3, depending on where we're at in the school year and determining what support we need, we do want to start to move more towards some math, fluency and fractions, as we'll see in our winter data, could use some attention.
So was this support plan formulated with the input of the teacher leaders, TCEA?
I think the support plan came through with, we talked to other school districts that have done an implementation plan. We have gotten feedback from our pilot coaches, our pilot teachers,
The district ELA team.
and the district ELA team. So as far as specifically the EA group themselves, those people are part of the EA group, but we're just trying to find best practice based on what CKLA and other districts our sizes have done. I mean, at the end of the day for PD, there's only so many days, right? We have 2 days in August, we have the RSGD, we have PLCs, and we have early release. So it's just a matter of how to structure those with so they're cohesive, right? Because a one-off that we kind of came into is not cohesive, and that's not how PD works.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
And then our costs at, the final item that we talked about to start with, 5-year contract, includes all the consumables, includes the online access, materials costs, that's with our 10% contingency based on fluctuations of student enrollment. Around 1.1 million, funded by, we looked just yesterday, Jesse and I and Brittany kind of went through budget, and the vast majority, if not all, that can be covered by 35J, which is the literacy grant that the state passed, and those funds have to be spent.
And we already have those funds, like we already have those, we're not waiting or.
I'm gonna guess that's up to $1 million and then the remainder is from the curriculum department budget.
Actually, we have a little more than that, so it might be totally covered. One thing we might end up taking out of Title II or some curriculum budget is when we look at that PD plan and CKLA and their support.
Okay.
We do anticipate the state releasing some more literacy grants. We know that's on the horizon. The good news is Brittany and I and Dan have done our homework. CKLA will be on the list as far as approved curriculum support materials, so we'll see when that happens. That just means more potentially support and maybe moving some of that support into the middle schools and the high schools when we see what that language looks like, right? So we got our eye on it.
So you're proposing a 5-year contract, but the boost reading that we just talked about a minute ago, that's a 1-year?
It is a
Pilot.
1 year included in this cost.
Right, so, I mean, so basically that's like a pilot for our district, and then, a year from now, we can expect y'all to come back and say whether, the recommendation is to extend it or not.
Yeah, I think it comes in right around $12 to $15 students, so it's a cost. And we wanna make sure and double check that at scale, right? The pilot teachers have had some good feedback when we talk about all teachers and what we see as far as data before we commit. And they're gonna give us a multi-year discount after year 1 if we decide to do it. The funding source is something that we'll have to talk about, but again, going into, we've done this too many times where we go into that extra program and then so slowly after like year 2 or 3, nobody's using it anymore and we're still paying for it.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting too to see if what feedback there is on the kids who need the most support, as well as the kids who want that extra challenge in case, it's more effective with one or the other population. Okay. Great, thank you.
Over less.
Okay.
CKLA.
All right, so with that, we want to put this on the agenda for approval for at the next board meeting. The question I think would be, well, this is gonna go to finance as well
It will.
on Thursday,
It will.
so,
It really is a purchase from that standpoint, so
yeah.
but consensus is good.
Yeah, with $1 million purchase, I wouldn't be surprised if they choose to put it on the full board agenda.
That
as a
would be my
discussion
guess.
item.
As well.
So, and who will be your acting chair incidentally?
Don't know.
That'll be determined, okay. All right, well
The
then,
irony is just about everybody will discuss it in committee by the time it hits the
Yeah.
board, so it's almost a moot
Yeah.
point.
Which is okay.
Yeah.
right. Okay, so moving on to the data, we've got our 2024 to 2025 elementary winter and secondary PSAT, MWEA and grades. And I will defer to Mr. Tisworth again.
Yes.
Ms. Houghton, Ms. Kate.
So we'll kick off, well, what I did supply for just board curriculum is just a quick update. Cause data for winter is something where we could get real deep into we could do a full study session on or just a quick overview. So what I supplied you with is pretty much K-5 math and ELA. And I showed you our growth, so I showed you our fall achievement data, our winter achievement data, and then also where that looks like as far as nationally normed, where we expect those kids to grow. right, in that particular data point. So for instance, if you look at, let's say, K2 math, right, if we look at first grade, right, their achievement data based on national norm, right, we talked bell curve, 62nd percentile would be more than we'd expect. And then on their winner, they came in at the 70th percentile. That's super good data as far as what it looks like for first grade. And then we go to the 66th percentile for growth. So this is interesting in that, you know, those students who have a growth projection, which is, I'm gonna go like super loosey-goosey here, and it's about 10 RIP points, right? So everyone has a certain growth that we want them to meet, or that is projected based on instructional days and where they scored in the fall. So based on that, we hit the 66th percentile as far as kids that hit that growth. So when I look at this data, a few things that always comes out to me when I go through this is, one in particular, I look at 4th and 5th grade math, right? And 4th and 5th grade math is something that we're gonna continue to target. We started it this year because we always see a bit of a drop kind of when it comes to our achievement data. When we hit that rubber hits the road, I think we move out of 3rd grade, we move out of that multiplication, we move more into that division and fractions, and that fluency kind of comes up. And from my experience at Westwoods or elementary, that's kind of where the rubber hits the road, right? If you don't have that fluency in place, that math, I believe, becomes a lot more challenging for kids, and we have to find better ways to support. So one thing that we've done, for instance, for math right now is our last PLC, they've started a fluency series that our math department has gone in, used PLC time and some early release time to really start looking at that, because we've been super reading heavy over the last 2 years. And we realize that math, as far as PD, we have work to do, and we have to incorporate that now. We feel like we're falling behind in those particular grades, and then how to do that next year, right? We're implementing CKLA. So that's hard, but at the same time, using that PLC time in the second half of the year, I think is gonna be kind of our mode and how we attack these issues. When I look at the data, the second thing I was looking at that kind of jumped out to me in our ELA data is we are starting to see some uptick as far as our proficiency in our data in our lower L, and I think some of that can be attributed to our JK program, right? I think our JK program and those kids getting those 2 years of kindergarten I think we're starting to see some of that uptick as far as it going through our other grades.
And this is all NWEA,
It's
right?
all NWA. So as
Okay.
far as, so that's what just to go through, and I'm not sure if the questions, but when we talk about all the data we use in the winter, and Jesse and I and Brittany are gonna come back in a board curriculum as far as our learning series go, and really start to talk about assessment coming up here in April and May, and what assessments make sense for the best bang for our buck that we get. Right now, we do NWA 3 times a year. Reading and math, and we're trying to think if that's the most, and that's not a requirement. The state requirement is twice a year. And we're trying to figure out with all the other assessments we do, right, we're over assessing kids, in my opinion, is how do we maybe cut down a little bit on what's required and what we do in order to get data in front of teachers that they can use. So one thing we've done this year is, especially with our AIMSweb data. So AIMSweb data is the first time that we've taken AIMSweb, and every student, K-5, has an AIMSweb assessment they do. And what that does is, I'm not gonna get too much into it, and Brittany can chime in also on the AIMSweb, is with that NWA is such big data that it's hard to drill down to what when we talk about standard, right? And AIMSweb helps does that. AIMSweb helps take that data and narrow it down a little bit. So just effectiveness of the data that we're looking at, I just kind of wanted to front load that we have some ideas about assessment and how to maybe make some assessments more helpful, and so we're not doing so many of them.
I remember that book.
Math expressions, yeah.
You know,
Um,
so another one we do at elementary that we're now doing district-wide this year for the first time, because we have data meetings around math, is Delta Math. And Delta Math, again, can drill down to an actual math standard. that we can then actually have a plan around, right? We talk about big math, right? They're in the 40th percentile for NWA. Well, what does that mean?
Exactly.
And then they give you, several standards that you could work on.
And you don't know if you're hitting the right one.
Right, but if we can drill down a little more with our local assessments, when we talk about CCALI moving into this year, our math expressions also has local assessments. That if we could incorporate these more, maybe pull back a little bit from parts of NWA, we could have more time to teach, right? NWA is unlike PSAT or M-STEP, right, where, especially PSAT, where it's a 1-day, 2-hour event. We have a 3-week testing window for NWA 3 times a year. Now, they don't do that all the time, all day long. And some tests are different from others, but when we talk about at-risk populations and we talk about special ed kids who would take a long time to do these reading tests, they're missing a ton of instruction. So we just wanna find a better balance, and we think there's some opportunities.
And if they're missing school on top of it, they're really behind.
Okay, you wanna talk about secondary?
Sure.
Oh, just real quick, and this is as far as how we look at our winter data and how we work with our data meetings. So we have all this data now. What do we do with it? Is that with our ELA and math that we have data meetings in every one of our elementaries that we kind of look through and come up with an action plan that we revisit several times during the year.
Okay, there we go. So for secondary data, the biggest indicators that we use would be our grades, right? The grades that kids earn in their courses. And then for middle school, we laid that on top of NWA. So this is a really high level distribution of, so every quarter I pull out the entire grades from Power School, and then I push those to our secondary lead principals who use them with their admin team. And then I use that with our curricular teams as well to sort of look at what do the grade distributions look like in the variety of courses that we have. We look vertically at it, we look horizontally from school to school. I put everything together. So when you look at that 55% sixth graders earned an A, that is honors ELA, regular ELA, and we do have some department ELA courses taught for our special ed students. So that's all those together. We look at them through all those different lenses. We'll look at them by those courses. We actually, as the building principals, look at them by teachers too. More so we can spot like where do we see things like, oh, that seems like a sticky point for us and we might need some more support there. Or wow, look at the progress we've made in that area. We're really happy with those results. So 93%, that top letter on my bar is the percentage of students who earned a C, a B, or an A in their ELA class for first semester, all sixth graders. And then I kind of laid that next to our fall reading NWA because I felt like those were sort of comparable. These aren't one-to-one, although I colored them like the rainbow one-to-one with you here. I mean, I wouldn't say like if I'm scoring the yellow on NWA, thus I should get a C in the course. Like that's not the way that is, but it's always interesting for us to align the data points and see like if we have 55% of our students earning A's and only we have 55% of them scoring in the high or the high average, right? Like how aligned is that, right? Because parents really, a lot of our parents are very active on Power School and helping support their student to be successful. A lot of our kids are very active on it, right? And so we want to ensure that that means of daily and weekly communication is accurate as to how kids can perform. So the line that I did put on the NWEA is sort of at that line in which we want all kids to be at that grade level norm or above, and that yellow is sort of between the 40th and the 60th percentile. It's a one shot, so that is within one standard deviation of where you would want to be able to say this kid is reading at grade level, is performing there. All right, so again, you can kind of see the percentages across the top there, and they are higher for how our kids earn grades, right? I think that's a shocker to anyone, but we're always sort of looking and ensuring that those are lined up too. So that's middle school English here. I'll just warn you, math, it is more difficult and more challenging for our students, right? But like you look at that 7th grade, 7% of our students earned an F, right? That's a hot spot, right? We need to dig into that more. We need to understand who those kids are. is it it's not our honors kids, so it's it our department kids, is it our regular, is it one side of town? You know, and then that's what we do, I do with the building principals on that lens too. So those are your math grades from middle school and now your NWEA.
D is grace of God, so you almost could combine the D and the F together in addressing it.
Yeah, that's really why I like that total in the tops is C and above, right? I mean, there's still room to grow there, absolutely, but you're right. And then every week our secondary sites pull all their power school grades and they do huddles with their counseling staff and they look at D's and F's. They're looking at kids and they like save it. They've got these giant spreadsheets where each Monday they pull it and they're looking for kids. What kids are we missing that maybe, or what kids are falling off or need more support, or what kid have we tried support with and it's not working? What else could be the situation, right? That's where they're looking at. Could this be an attendance issue? Could this be a behavioral issue? Is there potentially a learning disability here, right? Like, what are all those different factors? It's different when a kid struggles in one course versus all across the board, right? Like all of that. So that's your middle school, and then for your high school, because we don't deliver NWA, it's not really appropriate in high school, so we do PSAT, remember, in the fall, we do it again in the spring, but here's your ELA grades, same distribution there. Now you're probably wondering, wow, 11th grade, they just rock it out. They do. A lot of kids sort of developmentally have sort of figured out where they, need to be and what they need to do to be successful. Yes, we also have a lot of our 11th graders not included in this who might earn their English credit over Career Tech Center. A lot of our programs over there will hit the ELA standard. We do not typically take the 11th grade math credit. We'll take it as an elective, but still want those kids to finish with Algebra 2 with us. That better sets them up for SAT prep for them, to be honest. They're just more successful with that. But that population, and it is about 200 plus kids at each high school, is not included in that distribution. Just an FYI. And then our PSAT fall data. Now, PSAT is different than NWA. There's 3 categories instead of 5 on this, right? So there's proficient. The light green is what we call partially proficient, right? We're really close to hitting that. Maybe our standard deviation, like had I taken it on a different day or done, you know what I mean? Like I could have hit that proficiency, I'm really close, and then the not proficient. So I put there for our 9th grade through our 11th grade, what our TCAPS fall percentages were of students at each of those. But then I did want to give you a comparison. Like, are we at 100%? Nope. We have room. I think we will always have room to grow. We will never stop. That's always our goal. But like, just take a glance over at the state column. Our kids are doing quite well. They outperform regionally. We know that they are above and beyond outperforming at the state as well. Especially important when we look at this next slide, which is our high school map. Sorry. Can you help me out, Dan?
No. Yours.
Maybe this is like okay, there's our high school map. So same thing, you have your semester grades on the one side, our PSAT on the other side. All right, so first of all, a couple things for you to know. If you didn't know, the PSAT and SAT benchmark for math is higher. A lot of reasons why, I could go into that, but you actually need to score higher to earn proficiency in math than you do in English, just so you know. But you'll see the percentages are lower, not excusing it, but they are lower for that. But check out the state, 20% of the 9th graders in the state hit the proficiency for math this fall, right? I'm not happy with 46% as a former current math teacher. That I think there's a lot of room in different stuff that we're trying to do, but man, like when I look at that 20%, I'm like, okay, like I'm not in a corner crying right now, right? Like we can celebrate some things, but also know where room is. One of our hotspots always is Algebra 1. As a freshman, look at that 11%. We've done a lot of work at making Algebra 1 accessible. We've done a lot of work of actually running those class sizes a little bit smaller. We are doing a lot of work through this. It's this Canadian researcher. He wrote a book called Building Thinking Classrooms, which is engagement strategies, purposeful practice, getting kids to group and work together, but also like teaching some of those fundamental skills that they need to have in thinking and their executive skills in math. But that's a spot we watch. I will tell you, if a student fails first semester Algebra 1, that student is more likely to not graduate on time. which is it's a big thing for us, right? And
It is.
when I was a high school principal, I used to think like these were like my 38 sheep that I'm like constantly like, we gotta keep them because they are the ones that like we just tend to lose for a variety of reasons, but those are our kids that really need to ensure that they've got a connection to school, they feel like they can do it, and we're giving them the skills so that they are developing and growing. So that's information there.
It's the Rubicon.
It is, and it's like never ending, right? I wish I could just solve it for you all and say this is how you fix it, but it is, you know, a lot of math, especially Algebra 1, is that procedural and organizational thinking, and our kids who just struggle with that in general, it
I
haunts them.
don't know if you can give some of the basics of that earlier through gameplay. I just don't know.
Yeah, I think we've thought about that. Engagement is really important, right? How do we get the kids to like start and then get stuck and not just give up, right? Like
Right.
teaching that
And
persistence is
don't take
real.
it personally. You're
Yeah.
gonna go
You
over
have to
this
get it
way.
wrong a lot, and that's okay, you know?
Yeah.
So, and then like Dan, I just wanted to show you guys, what do we do with all this data? What do we do at a district level? What do we do at the building levels? And then how are our teachers using this data to do some goal setting? For PSAT, it's awesome. So every teacher at our secondary gets their kids and how they scored. They get them by hours so they can group kids. They can set student, like one-on-one student conferencing goals. They also get a link to, these are sample questions at each of the different score bands, so they can see what that looks like for bell ringers and incorporating in. And then I linked in here too, in case you were interested, I linked in the protocol that we use to look at grade distributions, and then I linked in high school and middle school, just a little bit more in depth if you guys were curious. And if you want even more, let me know. I mean, I've got sheets and sheets, and we kind of we'll start big at the department level, and then we'll drill down into different courses and different student groups and that type of stuff. But I linked those in there in case you wanted to peruse more data in your spare time. So
Could you back up just to this one or the
Mhm.
previous one, doesn't matter, but I mean, just looking at the discrepancy, like you mentioned, and I really appreciate that you brought this up, that we have, you know, X amount of kids getting a C, a B, or an A in their grades, but then a lower percentage hitting that proficient level with the standardized test scores. So I've always wondered, what is the discrepancy? Is it like the Michigan curriculum standards are lower perhaps than what the NWEA or the PSAT are measuring? People talk about grade inflation, but we have standards against which the teachers grade, right? So I feel like it's not great, it can't be grade inflation, it's the standards
Oh, I think
by
grade
which. Well,
inflation
anyway,
is
so
a
I
big
just wanted to
part of
open
that.
that up because I am curious about that discrepancy.
yeah, I think and part of it is course review audits that we're doing. It's having a constant conversation, and it's laying these two. Kristen Studeman shared her notes from her West Middle School staff meeting after they looked at this, and they had a lot of comments about not so much like this, but they looked a lot at their honors kids too, because they get a little more ingrained. So this distribution, but picture it with honors kids, right? And a lot of our middle school honors kids do quite well with grades. I mean, I'm talking like above 85% get A's, but that is not close to meeting proficiency on those outside assessments, right? So the question is like, how are we preparing kids to be able to, if they really are performing at that level in their class, that should translate to performing at that level on that, right? And I don't have an answer for that. I just say that like laying these next to each other is very helpful to push those conversations and for us to really talk about like, what do we value and what does a grade really represent?
I think it gives them a false sense of complacency sometimes, but I think it's also a motivator for some kids that otherwise would slack more easily.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some poignant moments in my career, and one of them was a mom who had a kid who was a senior at the time and was struggling getting into some of the schools, and she had his transcript, and he was a straight A student, and then she put his SAT scores, and he didn't meet proficiency on either one, and she kept saying, how did this happen? Oh, yep, how did that happen? That's on me, right? Like, so and it's not a matter of us saying like nobody should get an A, but like us ensuring that if we're telling kids, you know, you are achieving at that highest level, there should be some certainty that that would translate, you know. It's not a one-to-one though, so like, you know, so
Yeah.
this is a one-day test. It's a one-day test. Your grade distribution is 18 weeks worth of work, right? I think we could all think of times in our career in which we're glad there
But
wasn't a one-day test
sometimes,
on
you
that day.
know, the grade thing is interesting. Having been on the other side grading papers, and I've had students come, I've never gotten anything but A's. How could you give me a C for this? And you can sit there and you can say, well, it's because this and this and this and this. I was expecting thinking to be demonstrated on this paper. Don't just give me back what I gave you. Can you use it? Can you own it? And I don't know if that's what some of the problem is. You know, is whether you're giving it back to the teacher and getting the grade in return. Whereas that, do you really own the material? So if it's asked in a different way, you can actually deal with it.
Well, and there's kids that just don't do well on standardized testing.
That's
period.
true,
100%.
For sure.
I have to go, I apologize.
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. I have let
Yeah.
Josie know my thoughts on some of the upcoming things, and the celebrations and successes look amazing. I'm sorry to miss this part in particular,
Yeah.
so.
Good meeting
Thank
though. Thank you for sticking now as long
Oh,
as you
no,
could.
it's okay, I have to go to the next room so I can have my
Do you
staff
need
meeting.
us to go to 8 o'clock next time?
Yeah. Well, I think that's
15
too early for Josie.
Well, we can think about it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure 15 more minutes would have bought us enough time today.
Oh,
This is a good one.
Thank you.
I guess just one more question I had about the grades too. I don't know how common a practice this is, but perhaps one factor is if a teacher lets kids retake, you know, resubmit and they don't get penalized for that. I'm not here to argue the merits of it one way or another, but that could lead a kid to getting an A, whereas with the NWEA or PSAT, it's one shot, you know.
And you do have to kind of weigh what is your value. I mean, if you're looking for mastery of learning and giving them the opportunity to do that, is that more important than that standardized test score? And there is a philosophical belief you have to determine that.
But not the fistfights.
Correct.
So it sounds like in you know, Ms. Houghton, Mr. Tisworth, you guys have been with the district now for a couple of decades. That conversation hasn't been occurring until lately. Is that what? Am I
Grades?
correct to hear? Like, overlaying the grades versus the standardized test scores and just talking about that delta.
We've talked about doing it, we've just never had somebody give us the data before, and I'm like, well, I can figure out a spreadsheet, and then I just put calendar reminders, and Sophie and technology and I work together, and then there's just so much our secondary principals are just doing on the day-to-day, so them just getting the data pushed to them with a protocol and a process, and then, hey, how can I support you on this, is like huge for them, because that has been a new.
It's just Jesse formalized it for secondary, right? Where we were working, I think there's a little more silo in previous years. We were both at secondary schools, leading secondary schools, and I've been at several, and it was more, we know that grades and data for these scores don't match up, right? That's always part of our middle school honors conversation that we have. But now that she's formalized it, right, where Jesse now has an actual cadence to looking at it and bringing it to people's attention, and now that trickles down and now it's part of the staff meeting, then I think it's more addressed, more efficient.
Well, I appreciate your taking that initiative, and I look forward to future updates. Yeah, thank you.
So the next item that we talked about, student achievement, meaningful student achievement outcomes. So I wasn't sure exactly how to tackle this, because we do have our board study session coming up that also addresses this. So what I did is there was a graphic provided as part of this that was passed on to me just to show, and this is something that's been kind of shown for several different board meetings. I've seen it online also, right? The idea of our at-risk and how proficient they are. This was actually the graphic that was provided in this particular email for today was from 22-23. And it's the idea of, that 39% that are proficient for at-risk, which means we have 61%-ish right, that are not proficient, and what does proficiency mean? Because I think sometimes in narrative, or if you just look at this data point by itself, is that you have 61% of our third graders at risk they can't read, right? If you were to give them a book and put it in front of them right now, they couldn't read it. And I just want to kind of dig into the data a little more to show, one, what is our actual step? What is, before we decide to go into the meaningful achievement outcomes, right, or start that conversation first, what is the actual test measure, right? So if we look at our ELA M-STEP, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, right, because that's what we do M-STEP for ELA. We do ELA 3, 4, 5, we do math 3, 4, 5, and then we do science and social studies also for fifth. So the test is actually broken down into 4 different sections. And then again, this is right off of OEAA, right? This is our Michigan report card, or all of our data goes into that we pull out. So it's broken down into reading, writing, listening, and research when they break it up into different categories. And the state also, as Jessie showed in her PSAT data, not only is there the above and there's a proficient, but there's that partially proficient component that's never actually brought into that big data piece that says we only have 39% of our kids proficient, right? That partially proficient can be one question, time of day, and partially proficient, when we look at it for data, MSEP's a little tougher because the data is a bit of a lagging indicator, right? It's so far behind. Is that partially proficient is less than a year behind, right? As far as what we're looking at as far as reading goes. So if you add those numbers up, right, as far as who's below proficiency, right, on different aspects of that, you know, we're still around 70-75% on most of those areas. So again, if you break this up a little more, then this graphic kind of shows specifically when we're looking at students who are, when we look at some subgroup comparison, economically disadvantaged versus economically not disadvantaged, right? Or we look at that at-risk factor also. So the top graphic is all students, where we talk about above, at, or near, right? Where we talk about partial proficiency gets us to around 70%. The main thing that obviously just jumps out there, right, when we talk about that below proficiency for our economically disadvantaged kids is 41%, right? So that idea that that's the number when we look at if we're going to attack a number to start with, right, instead of looking at 39% just being proficient, right, we think there's more like, I'm going to go about 60%, right, would fall into that above or at or near proficient. It's at 40% compared to the kids that are not economically disadvantaged. And how do we, when we talk about closing the achievement gap or talk about meaningful outcomes, that's the number I think we have to hone into. And then what do those meaningful outcomes look like? That's, I think, a separate discussion we can have. We were gonna look at a lot of this in our board study session. As far as specifically, also, we had some articles about some research that looks like when you put meaningful outcomes based on proficiency or based on growth, and how often are those actually met when we randomly assign, we can do that now. Let's put a 10% growth on all of our at-risk kids over the next 3 years. But that's not actually, it doesn't, it's not an appropriate way to look at this, so.
Yeah, and I would say this, I've done a lot of research on this, and I love the conversation around this. I love it, right? It's something that's like totally off. Dan and I are like, yes, like let's talk a lot about this, and let's talk about our kids who are, like, it's noticeable that they're falling behind, right? And what are we doing? But you can't talk about proficiency without talking about growth, right? And what I love about like NWA is they have the quadrant, and they're the quadrant of the kids who are low achieving and low growth, right? So I think setting some appropriate goals for those kids and ensuring that those kids are getting a full year, if not more growth, is super important for us to set some goals around. I think just subtracting the difference and dividing by that's just not appropriate when you're talking about something as complex and as abstract as student learning. So I would really encourage us to think more about growth goals. And then, like, if that's really our goal, like, there's a lot of systems in place. One of them is a research-based curriculum. But then we can lens that through, like, okay, we're gonna have to make some hard decisions about then if we know kids need a daily dose of high quality phonics instruction, what does that mean and look like? And where are we able to do that every single day for these kids because they need it?
And not all kids will need it.
all kids need phonics instruction, I would
No,
say, but
no.
not all kids
The
need that
higher-
intentional
Exactly,
exposure, yes.
yes.
But these kids really, really do, and it is, if you're really talking about with fidelity, it means every day for 90 minutes of, and then there's some decisions, right? There are schools in the South, I was reading about one that has 100% poverty rate and almost 100% reading proficiency, but I will tell you, when you look at the structure of that district and how that school is set up, every decision they make is through that idea of literacy comes first all the time.
And how do our systems support every child that's in that 40%? Because the 40% aren't all at Heights, the 40% are all at Blair, right? Cherry Knoll is a title school, right? Long Lake is a title school, Silver Lake is a title school, right? Eastern, Willow Hill, Montessori, they are not title schools, but they are big enough schools where those percentages aren't represented where they get title money. And they're trying to also support these students, right? When you got 400 plus kids at Willow Hill or Eastern's pushing 500, right? And you have, let's say you have 10% free and reduced, right? That's still 50 kids that they have to support without the extra infrastructure that we give the other schools. So I think that the discussion seems to, when we talk about at-risk, economically disadvantaged, we know we have 2 schools that are full title that are over 90%. And I think we do a pretty good job as far as support goes, infrastructure wise. But if we have the discussion, I just wanna make sure we're discussing all those kids that are in that 40%.
So how does the federal or the state at-risk funding work for the, I'll call it a second tier, the Long Lake, Silver Lake, and I'm sorry, what was the third elementary
Cherry
school?
Knoll.
Cherry Knoll.
And
Is it a
Cortate is actually, was part of that, and with their free and reduced, we've had some, I think Dr. Van Wagner has communicated with our at-risk funding decrease substantially, like $1 million.
So the federal Title I money, does that flow through to that second tier at a prorated amount compared to the fully, okay?
Yeah, so our 2 fully titled, they're well over $250,000 of additional funding that's all title because of that. And those students receive a much higher rate of funding for that Title I.
Okay, and then same for the 31A, is it in 31A?
Not quite as much, so I think that historically, the district has put more towards Blair, Traverse Heights, those elements. So like Dan was at Westwoods, he'll tell you that you didn't get very much 31A at all, even though you had kids that did qualify.
Especially that first few years, and it's still the case now, right? Westwoods looked much different my first year there, because they closed Interlock, and we have 80 of those kids, 70 of those 80 were at risk that were introduced to our population. And there's other ways besides, we look at title, we look at risk, we look at our formula to determine teacher support, that there's extra FTE given to some title schools. There's extra FTE out of general fund given for social work also. So there's when you add up, and that's what's part of board study sessions, to look at that infrastructure and what we're doing now, because in a total dollar amount of what that looks like, of upwards of, we're getting close to $200,000 to $300,000.
Right, it sounds like there are rules that surrounding the federal Title I money, but then with the 31A state at-risk money, we have
It's a
the
little bit more.
discretion as a district
For sure.
how to allocate that. Okay.
And the hard part we have now is we're just about ready to receive $1 million less of that.
Right, right, okay. Well, I think everybody on the board, there's no question, is concerned about the kids who are economically disadvantaged and trying to close that achievement gap. But I also want to note there are kids who are economically disadvantaged who perform well, who are proficient. And it's not a one-for-one relationship, right? That is one point. And there are kids who are from affluent families who also aren't doing well. There are kids all across the board socioeconomically vis-a-vis their academic performance. But the other thing I was going to just ask/comment on is the majority of our kids are probably in the middle, right? They're not necessarily the highest achievers, but they're not the kids who need the most support. They're in the middle. And to me, a rising tide lifts all boats, and I want to make sure we're not leaving behind the majority of the kids in the middle because we're focusing on the kids at the bottom, regardless of their socioeconomic background, right?
The rising tide will raise all boats if you don't have a hole in your boat.
So Yeah, so
kind of.
absolutely, so like, that's the question, what would be the hole in the boat that you would be concerned about? That we're not plugging as a district? Do you have something specific in mind?
I don't. I think you're definitely gonna have to somehow have a lot of support out of families. And that may be where the rising tide is the rising tide is support of families outside of school time. So that's important. I think it's gonna be complex. My question is, do you
Thank you, Ms.
have-
Mapes, for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Go continue to do good work.
She's gotta go teach her third and fourth grade.
That's right, that's right.
But do we have math, the science of math, in the same developmental stage as CKLA? Do we have anything like that in curriculum? And we've talked about different programs and we've purchased, in the time I've been here.
Yeah.
Do you think we've got math programming to the same level?
Yeah, I'm not as worried about the curricular part. I think where we should focus more of our energy is in supporting the instructional part of it. I think there's a pendulum, we talk a lot of math about procedural, right, like building the skills, and conceptual, like the big understanding of what you're doing, and math has swung it just nationwide farther towards the conceptual, which is what you see the kids just don't have the basic skills, right? And so where's the sweet spot of developing the skills and also knowing, like, when would I use these skills, how would I use how is the procedure, when would I use these skills, and like what do they mean when I'm doing them, right? So
Or what's my control of my tool bag?
how do I choose which skill I'm gonna use
And
at
do
this
my
time?
tool-
And
do
then
I-
actually implement the skill, yeah,
Do I
there's,
have adequate tools in my bag?
but I'm not as worried about, I mean, math expressions, which is what we use at elementary, is very vetted, it's very aligned. I have there's not a major curricular gap. I'm sure there are better curriculars, but it's not one that and then we're using the CPM at the secondary, and that one again, it's a really well thought out and developed curriculum. I'm not worried about the curricular gaps.
But we still have that hump with fractions and vision.
In fourth and fifth grade, yep.
So in terms of this agenda item, for us as a curriculum committee to give input on meaningful student achievement outcomes, obviously we don't have the input of Trustee Byrd here right now, but I just wanted to probably state what's obvious to everybody. This is just piggybacking on our February 10th full board meeting and prepping us for the March 18th study session. And we did get a request from a member of the Finance Committee, Trustee Schmidt, for us to just kind of give our input, have a preliminary conversation here as curriculum committee on what measurable outcomes we might be interested in. Again, I want to just preface, this is a preliminary conversation, but we just looked at the data, which is a great segue to this conversation. And I really appreciate the points that you're making, both of you, Mr. Teisworth and Ms. Houghton. And I guess just open it up to any preliminary thoughts that you might have, Trustee Peck.
Well, I think that what I'm hearing is you feel that the curriculum's pretty solid.
We're working on it.
Areas.
We've got adapting it and then reviewing it and maintaining and monitoring it, yeah. And that's important. We have to have research-based programs that are coherent, right? You hear that a lot. Coherence is really important, right? And then it's the implementation of it, right? And at a large district, that implementation is, I think it's a tougher one for us to monitor and maintain and do that piece of it.
Do you think having practical skills opportunities for some of these areas would be helpful? Getting them out of the conceptual into, we do a lot with gaming and, I really am anticipating your math class. It's hands-on in what, geometry?
Well, we're working on trying to figure out, those elements, the hard part with those is that historically when they've been done in 2 hours and having kids in 2-hour blocks and being able to get all the Michigan Merit Curriculum things we're trying to figure out with that, but, we mentioned 9th grade, like Algebra 1, that is a point, that's the one area that, Jess and I have talked a lot about, how can we look at that? But I think that, what I'm understanding is, does the board wanna look at the measurements of past failure rates of Algebra 1? Is that a metric you wanna look at? Is it the 3rd grade, growth? Like what is it specifically of a couple of key data points the board wants to look at and get deep on? Is what the spirit of what I'm hearing at the table last time, it's what we've talked about here. And so, what are those specifically? Last time, for instance, we talked about the study session is just focused on elementary.
Right.
So where collectively does the board want to go a mile deep and an inch wide on versus a mile wide and an inch deep? That's what collectively I'm hearing, but again, this is something you guys have wanted to bring forth, and that we're just trying to give you different points for you to decide on what that is.
And a lot of it is based on the study session, is actually just to highlight things that we are currently doing to close the achievement gap. I think there's a lot of stuff that we currently do, infrastructure wise, but also as far as our initiatives go, that we're working towards this, that people might not realize that we're currently doing, right? Research based, again, things that are definitely framed around tier 1 instruction. Because when we talk about, again, you made a great point that as far as economically disadvantaged, right? We have 60% of our kids that are at, near, or above, right? Currently, right now in 3rd grade reading. So, and we have 20% of our kids economically disadvantaged that are above, right? As far as their achievement goes.
And I would say too, it's just a really complicated thing, closing the achievement gap. And if there was a district who had it figured out, then we would all just do that, right? It's not that, it's a layer of, do we have research-based instruction? Do we have a multi-tiered systems of support, like with fidelity, 100% in all of these buildings? Do we have our resources allocated appropriately to the students who need more, right?
And I think we're getting there, because part of the thing is, I think part of the question is, why aren't we there now? Right, I think our reading curriculum has something to do with that, but the way we are structured now, with Dr. Van Wagner has done over the last, I'm going to say year, is that we can now concentrate. I work with my 11 elementary principals that work very closely with Brittany, right? And how do we create systems so things are consistent and are economically sustainable? We can go ahead and throw, we get our title money, we can throw it all at one building for a year. And maybe our data will go up, maybe it won't. It'll make us feel better, because that's how we feel about education, is that if we put money towards something, something's gonna happen that's positive. But if we continue to keep in that research-based realm, right, if we continue to think about that and give it time, because it's another thing about education, we want it, anything more than a year that we do, we get a little nervy, right? We see like we have to do something new.
Yeah, I was just gonna say too, I would be nervous or concerned about focusing on, say, 3rd grade, when we gotta work on our 8th graders, right, to be successful in high school and graduate and be ready for the world, jobs, and college. So I mean, personally, again, thinking of, lift the tide, all boats rise. If we looked at average NWEA test scores, all grades, both ELA and math, for 1 year, 3 year, 5 year target growth rates, like 1% in 1 year, +1 average.
A meaningful, achievable.
Meaningful,
goal,
but
yeah.
exactly, meaningful but achievable. We want a stretch goal for that, 5-year mark, but you wanna have something that's not going to be so outlandish that it's gonna, be unachieved and lead to poor morale.
And we know we have a nationally normed, it's not something that moves constantly, and it's not way after the fact, that we can't do anything with our teachers and moving that. The only caveat, and I don't think you meant so far back, I'll just remind that NWA did change their cut scores 3 years ago, I wanna say.
And there's
You know,
another
so-
round coming
Yeah.
up.
So you wouldn't wanna go too far back to stay within, like, you know, back and then forward. You know, no, to try and compare that apples to apples to apples to apples.
Well, I think it would be from now going forward.
That's
right?
what I thought you meant, but,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
so like in
And I
one
would
year.
I would actually start next, cause they're gonna change this summer. Right now, we're still under 2020, so the last NWA conference I was at is their 2025s are coming out this summer, and then our fall date is gonna be based on that, so there's a new set of cut scores.
Right, so next year would be like the baseline.
That would be a good
And
baseline.
then fall of 2026 would be.
But where that's hard, and I 100% agree with what you just said. Where it's hard is that, you know, in our conversations, that third NWA test often falls right next to M-STEP. And so the question is, do kids have test fatigue when they've taken NWA and then go to take the fourth test now of M-STEP, you know, in that way? That's what throws a little wrinkle in this. I'll tell you, there was a time when Brian Winston was our state superintendent, he made an effort to think about going NWA as a state assessment because of this.
Right.
Never happened, unfortunately, he passed away, but that's a dilemma and that I want the board to think about in the mix of this. Like, if we're going to do that, understand, you know, like, if we're still doing a third test,
Mhm.
that I do believe that we suffer on our M-STEP scores because kids have test fatigue within a month of taking that third NWA test.
I think that you can get into chasing tests, and I don't think that's gonna really show that a kid owns the information.
And that's a philosophical thing, that's exactly what I'm
I
saying.
know.
There aren't any other standards by which we can measure.
I wish, right?
success, right?
Well,
Well, that's where I think what's nice about NWA is there are growth goals, like,
Mhm.
and that's like, I think setting some goals around ensuring that especially the kids that we know are come to us with less opportunities, how are those kids growing, right? It's actually super easy for us to find and to track over time. It's a different cohort of kids every year. So you say a 1% increase, but there's a lot of variability just in statistics. You'll get a cohort through and you don't know if a 1% increase is because of something we did or just because humans are different and there's variability, right? So I like growth, like where is our growth for those kids in particular? Year to year to year, right? We better be seeing those kids, if we have systems in place that we're intentionally using, closing that gap, right? And we could see that by them making a year or more worth of
And learn from our teachers that are consistently getting more than a year's worth of growth out of kids.
Mhm.
I mean,
Really talking about that.
is it appropriate to make that, so I'm thinking elementary, right, in third grade, and 4 years of exposure to CKLA, right, when they hit third grade, is instead of doing the yearly, like Jesse mentioned, like, even within NWA, we talk about margin of error, right, can go from 2 to 3%. I know with big data, right, that looks like it narrows down a little bit, but do we do a 4-year goal or a 3-year goal about growth and what our growth looks like now with our third graders? Third grade just happens to be a grade we fall on because of third grade reading law, right, and how that affects or is impacted. That is the first year they do M-STEP, so we do have a second piece of somewhat norm data, at least state-wise, that we can compare to.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking of with the adoption of CKLA, I know there's always that learning curve, you know. I mean, I've heard the district say in the past that year one, you're not gonna knock it out of the park because everybody's getting to know that new curriculum. So that kind of tempered my personal expectations about what would happen year one with ELA. But I mean, to me, it's like, let's start at the top. If we have a 5-year
And implementation
Cool.
science is 3 to 5 years.
and we say, you know what, as a district, we wanna lift everybody up by 10 percentage points average growth, you know, is that achievable 10%? Again, percentage points, right? So if we're at 50 percentile for proficiency now, that's, you know, adding 10%, but not necessarily 10 percentage points, right? So it's not necessarily going from 50 to 60, it's going 50 to 55%, right? So that seems achievable. And then you back up and say, okay, well then in 3 years, can we get halfway there? And in 1 year, you know, maybe we do
Well,
get
that's-
1, 2, or 3%, but
that's what Holly was preaching last
a
year.
couple different,
Yeah, and we were thinking, well, that's, you're kinda kicking the rock up the hill rather than rolling it. And I'm not so sure. I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts, and I think that you don't have a lot of wiggle room in terms of time right now in the curriculum,
And that's what
Which-
Jesse's talking,
which is very hard.
so is there something you don't do?
Well,
Specials
you're-
wise,
you-
all those things that are tough conversations.
And you also talk about summer school, year-round school, and
But I mean, the biggest thing those schools talk about is time, resource and staffing, right? And those schools that I looked at, like, they do not have those extras that we have during the day because literacy is so,
dominates.
right? So like,
It's
you don't get
first
music
up.
twice a week, you don't get
Exactly.
PE twice, is
Right.
that what we want?
And the
I mean,
thing is
You're saying the
you
districts that are
need
most
music.
successful don't have the extra programming that TCAPS offers.
No,
Correct, because
they're
everything is
teaching
through the
for
lens,
test.
Right, yeah,
of,
yeah.
Teaching
Like
for the
Forest, I mean, we're
test.
talking about like Forest
No,
Hills.
not even in
no, I'm
Michigan.
talking out
I
of
don't
state,
know
like
any in
down,
Michigan.
none in Michigan, the ones that I looked at were in the
South.
south, yes.
Okay.
Those that were high, 100% poverty or close to it and really were, but
Some
again,
rural areas.
every decision was literacy comes first and you just have trade-offs, right? And so like,
And we have some hard things that, because we do still have state standards in those things.
And see,
And many people, those are great things for kids too, that keep kids,
Engaged.
interested, engaged in that.
they
And so,
do, and I think
you
that's
know.
important.
But would average growth rates of, 10% in 5 years and 5% in 3 years and,
I don't know, I'd want Jesse and Dan to take a look at those numbers.
yeah.
Spirit wise of where you're going, I think in spirit makes sense to me. Of exactly what the metrics are, I'd want them to kind of talk to the NWA reps, look at that if NWA is the thing that you guys are thinking. And like I say, I think I want them to go back and think about like in third grade, do we take the third NWA with it being the first M step? Like, what are our thoughts on that? I think these are things we can get into the study session and things a little deeper, I expect that and hope that the study session won't be the last conversation on it, but then you do get into things like there have been conversations before my time of balanced calendar kind of things, but do we survey our parents? Is there an interest in that? Like, I think, again, and this is where a lot gets into the strategic plan, right, for the board. Like, what do we wanna, maybe it's not even making a decision, it's what data do we wanna gather to begin to help the board make some of those kind of decisions as well.
Yeah, and I want to acknowledge too that when we did the strategic plan, 3 years ago, we came up with student academic achievement and growth as one of our 12 goals. But then as a board, we didn't get down into what's the specific objective to
Define
support that. What are the performance measures that we're gonna track? That was in the details that, we deferred administration, and I think the conversation now is, hey, let's, as a board, set some growth targets, or measurable outcomes, the things that are most important to us. If we could assess students' well-being, emotional well-being, like that was something really important 3 years ago, the mental health coming out of COVID, we would probably say, let's measure that. That one would be harder. I feel like that'd be subjective survey, but anyway, I just wanted to make the point that I think, it's not like everything in that strategic plan is the board gonna say, we're gonna get down in the weeds and.
Or we've arrived, I mean,
Yeah.
there are many things as I've talked to staff that we're gonna look at that and continue on the next one. There's some things we may go, hey, we're still gonna do that, but that's not the focus of the board right now, focus, and so that's where we'll get to with our next rendition.
So, just to wrap up the M-STEP versus NWEA, if we, because of you're saying test fatigue for kids, if we drop the spring NWEA and only had the M-STEP and the PSAT for 8th grade and beyond, does that, like, in that scenario, we either have to rely on spring M-STEP scores, which we don't get until the following fall, right? Or we would have to live with like winter NWEA.
Right, and that's a little bit of the problem, we don't have the third growth point, in that year, that's the big dilemma. I'll be honest, I've stuck with the third just because I feel like we've needed it, cause we've prioritized trying to look at growth. But I do believe in my heart, it also hurts us on M-STEP with those grades, because I think the kids are just dog tired of testing
Yeah.
when they get to the fourth test.
Yeah, when I talked to, there's that balance that Dr. Van Wagner was talking about of, our third and fourth graders only do 2 M-STEP. So we talked about maybe looking at taking their winter out and keeping their spring. Because when I talk to teachers, and I talk to what's the most valuable, and even by subject, right? Because it's a data that, and that's what I mentioned earlier about what I want to get into a little bit as far as assessment goes. But for 5th grade in particular, when they're taking 4 M-STEP, maybe just doing fall and winter NWA just for 5th grade might be a good option, right? Because 5th grade is a tough one, right? You're taking 4 M-STEP tests, you're taking 2 NWAs. I mean, there's definitely testing fatigue. Something falls off the plate there.
And
So
you're
I
being
think there's a
distracted by
variety of,
puberty.
yeah, and the puberty,
You're being distracted.
yeah, and it's
That's all it
springtime,
is.
and it's springtime.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
it's even
okay.
worse.
It's a trifecta.
All right, well, I appreciate, we've started,
Well,
oh, go ahead.
The other thing I wanted to say too is, I think that there's some merit in some of these kids being able to do something different than classroom work, and how to incorporate that even for some kids. Woodworking teaches you a lot about proportions. You talk about fractions because things won't line up if you don't. You learn a lot about force. You learn a lot about putting things together. You learn a lot about reading a plan. Maybe that would help. It's a break, but it's still presenting some of that information.
The project-based learning.
Yes. And quilting, same thing. But boys don't tend to get into quilting to the same degree often.
True.
But
Home ec,
and
you're talking about
that-
home economics.
I'm talking about a version of skills
Yeah,
class
yeah,
for some of the kids that could benefit from that.
And we do have some extensions, right? When we talk about our STEM and our robotics in middle school in particular,
And I
that is a
think
nice
that's
elective
useful.
to have as far as, but as far as that, and I think Jesse was at a conference and got some input about how to take the idea of our Career Tech Center and how can we scaffold that, or how can we build that out to include younger grades?
Yeah, she just had
Yeah.
a chance to visit a school that did a really bang up job at the middle school level with that in Ohio.
oh, cool.
That's
So,
cool.
Yeah, literally just
That's
last
cool.
week, so.
Yeah.
And see, I think that's real important.
Yeah.
And if you can get these kids to hang on, feel they have mastery, and do they really need that extra proficiency? Yes.
Well, we could put that on the agenda for next month, if it's not too stale, otherwise you can put it on the full board meeting.
We'll see where it all falls.
But just
Yeah.
reporting out on what y'all
Yeah.
learned
Yeah.
at that, cause I'd love to hear more.
Yep.
But in the interest of time, I think we gotta move on. I would be remiss though if I didn't also acknowledge that when I talked about those average growth scores earlier, if that is the way the full board wants to go, we're just 2 people here. But I definitely would not wanna overlook and not continue looking at, the economically disadvantaged versus
Mhm.
maybe we don't have specific targets. That's again for the whole board to discuss, but we should continuously, at the very least, continue to look at that breakout of the data. The way you guys have done, I mean, grades A through F and.
Yeah, anything that you guys want for that study session that you guys can communicate to Dr. Van
Okay.
Wagner
Will do.
will help Dan and I prep
Yep.
for that too.
Okay. And, okay, moving on then to, we're gonna look at the draft or proposed TCAPS 2025 to 2026 school year calendar. And Dr. Van Wagner,
Yeah.
you are the lead.
Yep, so a few key things for this. Definitely had the chance to talk to some parents and coffees and things. And one of the things that I know is a source of contention are half days, early release days, that element. So there were 2 things that when I looked and had conversation with our team going into negotiations with our union groups was a consistency. So we have had a mix of some are half days, some are early release days. Parents are like, okay, what time are we getting out? So seeing if there was a way within the calendar we could bring some consistency to that. looking at, working with our professional development and working with TCEA and TCAPS, who we're trying to also incorporate a lot of training and things in. We've done that. And then as the board knows, last year we did some things with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day and Indigenous Peoples Day. Those are key things. One of the things with this calendar that we have is opening day is gonna change financially. It's no secret in the things that I put out there that we do have some financial challenges that we're trying to look at where we can make cuts the farthest away from classroom and revenue enhancements. Opening day is something that costs us around $60,000. And so we're looking at really changing that to a video that we would just create and send out, and we wouldn't have our traditional opening day. That is a voluntary day for, some of our folks. Those that it's not, it would stay that way as far as, their working day if that's within their contracts. But that's a change in the calendar. Then next year, Good Friday, which we had with this year, is a half day that falls within our spring break next year. So that really isn't irrelevant to any conversation on the half days. But as of last night, our team, Connie, Dan and Jesse and Christine, I believe.
No,
No,
Christine
wasn't there yesterday. Had the chance and met with the TCA representation and with TCAPS representation. And at this point, the calendar, if we have it, maintains the early release days now for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day and Indigenous Peoples Day. And feedback that I've had so far from board members is, while we think we had a perfect storm a little bit this year with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day with some cold weather, some things that we've been able to tweak a little bit. I think the board would like to maybe see about being consistent for another year is input that I've been getting, but I'm trying to get some affirmation of that with this, because we really are trying, our goal is to have a calendar set before spring break. As people go, so they can plan for next year in those elements. So right now, the way we have the calendar built is that we have, we did have 12 half days or TCR days, early release days this year. We're down to 10 in this calendar, 9 being early release, consistent, and only 1 half day, and it's the last day of school. So anytime we have a day that's not a full day, it's going to be an early release 2 hour. So it's actually a little bit longer. And we think that that's, better from that standpoint.
And the kids get lunch on.
What's that?
All kids get fed on that day.
And all kids
Unlike
get fed
half
on that
days.
day as well, which hasn't happened on our half days. I know we did have the comment, and I have had a couple talk to me about maybe the late starts. I will tell you, for transportation, that's a hard one for us. We actually have many drivers that drive just the mornings. And so if we were to push that, a lot of them will drive and go to maybe another job. And then we have a different group that does afternoons. We don't have as many in the afternoons. Tell you, like right now, I know that Tyson's close to driving in the afternoons, our director of transportation, not in the morning. So if we were to, morning is more consistent for us to start from that standpoint. So I'm not aware, I've been in districts that have done, late starts and those elements. I'm not sure, in your guys' career, have you ever had early or late starts here?
No, outside of our old 2-hour delays you used to do weather-wise, no.
Yeah, and that was even transportation very hard, because again, those people go to work, they're consistent, so we have them for that short period of time. So we have reduced down, we brought consistencies, to the days that they're early release, so everybody knows except the very last day. We are able to incorporate our professional development and those things that we need in there that we feel really good about where that's gone. And I know that the conversations that I've had with Connie last night and Jesse today, the meeting, that there is that, thought of support within our union groups, with it. But I just want some input if there's anything, because we are trying to work through that right now, so.
Yeah, I know there were a lot of different scenarios that were considered, and I definitely like where this draft has landed more or less. I do have a couple of questions. One is, it looks like we have 2 early releases in October, one on the 9th, and then again, the Indigenous Peoples Day on the 13th. So, but then no early release days, which is used for teacher collaborative routines, in May.
Yeah, so last night we moved that one in October, the one that's not on Indigenous
The
Peoples' Day.
9th, okay.
We actually moved it to the same week as MLK, and the reason there is our high schools and our exam week. So that week,
Right.
right now, the proposal is that it gets bookended with an early release on Monday because of MLK Day and an early release on Friday because of the change of the semesters. It is very hard. The secondaries really don't want 3 exams in a day for a student. And if you have a
Right.
full day of school to end a semester, really, the only way you can do it is 3 exams, which is tough on kids. And so putting the early release on that Friday allows them to still spread the exams 2, 2, and 2 for the 6 periods, right, across 3 days for kids. And so right now, that's what that week in January looks like. In May, we run AP testing the first 2 weeks of May. And we actually have a situation this year that we have an AP test that we have about 60 kids signed up for, and we have an early release. So there's a lot there. Number one, keeping your testing scenario quiet, and as you're dismissing 1,000 kids from a high school, right, is a tough one. Also, those kids who are in that AP testing and rely on busing. And so we have to figure out what the transportation plan looks like for those kids. We really want all of our kids to have access to our AP exams and those run.
Sure.
And now that we have such a robust offering, which is great, then of course the cost now is how do we schedule those and ensure all the kids have, those dates are set by College Board. We cannot change
Right.
those dates.
And I
So
would not wanna
that
interfere
runs
with
those
that.
first 2 weeks, and then that 3rd week in May is seniors' last week typically, for our high schools. So again, that's a week in which we just felt like an early release, that's the yearbook distribution week, that's our honors convocation week, that's our seniors' last day, we tend to do pep assemblies and invite in the community. It just was not a week in which we felt like an early release would work either.
And the May has all the testing schedules
It also
KA.
has, yeah.
where you're overlapping MSEP and NWA we just talked about. May is a lot of those tests that take place.
A lot of field
And
trips
the
too.
value, right, as far as that, just academically, when we go through what it looks like for our PLC schedule, right, that last PLC in April, it's kind of a nice point to start to make some end goals.
So the TCEA though, were they okay with not having a teacher collaborative routine?
Yeah, we
during
talked around the
exam day?
table as to why. We did move that April one week later, so we'll come back and have a full week after spring break and then do that early release that next week. And they were okay, like a lot of the elementary folks were like, well, that's actually good for field trips, cause now you can plan all those and you have that whole day. And so they preferred having the 2 in January for the MLK and the end of the semester. That was their preference.
Okay. So then in January, and I know I had talked to Dr. Van Wagner about this. I know this year we had MLK Day after the high school kids had their final exams the week prior. So I think there probably were all, in addition to the weather and the illnesses, there were probably kids who were like, I just worked my, behind off for all these exams. I want a 3-day weekend, mom and dad. And so you fix that problem by having the exams follow MLK Day. But then I also know the teachers are using those days leading up to the exams as preparation review days. So would they have Tuesday the 20th as a review day?
That's a normal review day too. Yeah, I agree. I mean, our high schools are our largest enrollment buildings, and when 3,000 kids don't show up, that doesn't help us, right? In our high schools, we need them to carry the count. And your thinking is spot on. By putting MLK Day at the end of the semester, kids are gonna show up because they're trying to end the semester on a good note and get things done. We will still have MLK education that day. We're committed to that. We think we can work with our teachers as to what that looks like for our kids.
And it's an early release, not a half, so
Correct,
it is
yeah.
longer.
On
We
the
see
Friday.
a lot, there is a substantially different attendance than a 2-hour early release day than a half day. Half day, I mean, middle school, you're done like 10:30.
Oh, I know.
You barely roll into the car line.
What,
and
you're
rolling
home
back in.
already?
Yeah, you might as well say.
And like we mentioned, and the lunch aspect, so we've never missed count,
Yeah,
knock on wood,
yeah,
on a 2-hour early release day.
yeah.
And now we're consistent,
Mhm.
except the very last day of school is a half.
Right. Yep, and that helps for people with elementary age
Yes.
kids who need
Yep.
childcare.
Yep.
Yep, okay.
And, I know it was mentioned about, trying to do, after-school care. It's hard. I mean, with people that are certified, obviously, when we're doing that, our staff is in professional development. We don't have easy ways to just do additional childcare. We run our extended day programs, but we struggle for that staff right now. We've got, I know in one building, we've had a principal that's running, running in, otherwise it wouldn't be going. So that's a struggle. I wish I had creative more ways to do that with state licensing and rules and all those things, but.
Can some of the teacher aides do it?
Again, a lot of them are getting professional development or working as well now, some of the stuff we're trying to do. They've asked for training, on that as well to have, and so, you can't, there are some rules that you have to have as far as that, a number of adults and those things as well. We'll continue to explore the creative thoughts, but we've struggled just to get people able and willing that they're not in training already on those days that are specifically designed for that purpose.
I just was noticing too, I know I'm revisiting what you said about the third week of May, where it's the seniors last week. You have that general assembly on the last day of that week, so it'd be Friday the 22nd of May. Would that help at all to have that, instead of late January, have that late May for the teachers in terms of the collaborative routines? And still get the seniors and everybody there for school that day for the assembly? They'd be excited to attend that.
I think the January idea of having the 2 early release days is one for Martin Luther King Day, is to have a 2-hour early, and the second one was end of semester, that it's important to have not a full day. So those 2 days are locked in unless you were to add an additional early release day. We can't. I didn't think we were going.
And we were trying to limit that down.
Yeah, and I also was hearing people talk about holiday weekends. I think that's part of what Ms. Arnold
And you'll
commented
see,
on today.
we put the teacher work, that one early release in November right up to Thanksgiving break. We did move that yellow teacher work day from January down to February, the Friday right after the early release. Again, then trying to give that to parents and families, and we've heard some of that too.
Yeah, I just was noticing May 22nd is right before Monday, Memorial Day, the 25th. So that would be a holiday weekend. But anyway, it sounds like y'all have thought about that, vetted it. That just was my thoughts there. So you got to go with what your teachers and your needs are. That's the most important, what's going to get us student attendance and so forth. The Blue Diamonds, the professional development days, so that is 2 this year and proposed for 2. Didn't we usually have 3?
The third was the day, the optional opening day, and that's what we've taken away.
Okay, so by state law, we just have to have the 2.
We have to have 5 days or 30 hours is what we have to have. And that is built into this.
Okay, so the TCR days, those count, if you add up all those 10, I think it's 10 days.
Correct. And you have the regional staff development day,
Right.
the grayish
Okay,
day, there's 3, and then the rest is built into those early releases.
okay, all right. Yep, well, I think the placement of the MLK Day and giving another go for year 2, I think with this new placement before high school final exams, it'll help us.
Well, MLK, that's a national holiday, the 19th.
It
Right.
is.
Yeah, so it just makes sense. It really does, because there are going to be a fair number of parents that are off work anyway. So childcare, God willing, won't be as big a problem.
It's surprising how many private sector employers do
employees on that
not
day, true.
honor MLK
True.
Day. Federal employees do, public employees do, but.
Well-
And that is our purpose, is to, have the education, but then have the early release and celebration of the holiday and towards that. And again, that is something that I know the board has had input from different leaders in our community. And so, again, I think so far the input is, but this is why I'm doing this, because obviously the board, I don't get the board together all at once till a board meeting, and we're trying to get this done, so that's why it is at each committee this week, so that I can get all 6 board members' input into this before we give the TCEA and TCAPS the okay to take it to their membership. That's what I'm just trying to get here.
Okay.
So.
Yep, there's very little there on national holiday.
Okay, great.
So we might as well forget National Month.
moving on to celebrations and successes, the best part of this meeting.
Yeah, we'll kick things off at Cortate. Cortate has their PBIS system that goes with the acronym ROAR. They're doing their ROAR Assembly Day and doing some skits with our Miss Myers, who's a CKLA pilot teacher, also part of our social studies curriculum team.
This is from West Middle School. Eric Quine, who's actually the district PE rep for secondary, applied for and received a grant through our TCAPS Academic Excellence Endowment. And he brought this into his PE class, and it was quite the hit. The kids loved it, playing this 9-square game.
It's fun.
Here's a PLC that we were talking about, that this is just a picture of the teachers participating at Traverse Heights around the math department developed a PLC around fluency last week.
And this is probably one of our uniquely qualified teachers, Dr. Lynch. She is highly qualified in French and Spanish and teaches both at one of our high schools for us at Central High School. This is the Key Club, and they were working really hard. She runs the Key Club over there, and they put together over 20,000 meals that were distributed through Father Fred.
I'm sure those boys really appreciated being pictured in the hair.
Yeah, they did. They kind of hammed it up, so we went with it. So yeah.
Students from our Math Counts program, math athletes at Montessori that participated at NMC. Great program. It's in both of our other middle schools also.
And this is one of our ESL teachers over at West Middle School, Miss Donahue. She and her students welcomed the Lunar New Year and did some pretty fun learning with that.
This is from our drawing class at West Senior High, and the photography students had their work on display under the exhibition that involves human rights.
And then this one is, in case you didn't catch the ticker article, about both of our choir directors. I know West is getting ready to open their musical, so a little plug for that. It opens not this weekend, but next weekend. And I know Eric is heavily involved, as is Mindy, their theater teacher up there. But you know, that article was just a great highlight of how we provide top-notch choral instruction to all of our students at our high school. So it's great.
And this is from Long Lake. So all of our title buildings have title funds that are specifically earmarked for family engagement nights. This is what Long Lake did. It was a big hit. Had a great turnout. I think over 200 people attended. They did a theme of an Escape the Rainforest challenge where they did various puzzles around literacy. It was a great night. Brittany, did you?
I did.
Yeah.
I took my kindergarten student who doesn't attend Long Lake, but we went, and it was a really great experience. Super engaging, very fun, very well connected to the content that's being learned across grade levels. So they did a very nice job.
Who designed the game?
I believe it was their building leadership team that worked collectively together to have it be more like she said, an escape room. So there were a certain number of activities and tasks that needed to be completed, and then you went into the cafeteria, put in a code word, and you unlocked a box that had raffle tickets. And then kids filled out the raffle tickets to then put into a raffle for an educational game choice.
And all those educational games built around literacy.
Yes,
Yeah, I had the
literacy
chance-
and or
I had the
math.
chance to make it out there and kind of see the raffle and all that. Kids were real excited with that, and the escape
That's
room,
cool.
I know, was really popular.
Oh yeah, escape rooms, all the rage,
great.
right?
Yeah.
Birthday parties and everything. So could that be replicated at our 10 other elementary schools?
It could be. So our title schools, so this is just earmarked funds, right? That all the adults
Okay.
participating, they are part of their timesheet and are paid. So that's at
Got it.
all of our title schools do a version of this.
Okay.
Again, when you go to Westwood, Eastern, Willow Hill, Montessori, there are 4 non-title schools. That would be something that would have to be
Yeah.
funded in a
Maybe their
different way.
PTOs would have to raise that. Yeah.
And they still do these nights, right?
Yeah.
Their leadership team do math nights, and we did them when we were at Westwoods.
Mhm.
Lot
It's
of
good
teachers.
education for the parents. Like, they want to know how to support their child and what they
Oh,
can do. Yeah.
Especially in the winter time when everybody starts closing.
yeah.
I know that Long Lake, they were happy to get out of the house.
Yes. It's really fun.
I had many parents tell me that.
Yeah.
Do we do centers in kindergarten, first grade here with parents come in?
For parent education.
No, in the classroom. Centers.
centers?
We do learning
We
centers
call them
sometimes,
centers.
right?
And well, you break your kids up into little groups and parents will come in and work with the kids, you know.
We do the centers part, as part of their curriculum, but not necessarily having, parents come in on a regular basis or
We
a
did that
structured
in
program.
Chapel Hill. It seemed, cause you were getting engineers come in, you were getting such a mix of professions. That it could be very interesting for both the kids and the parents.
Yeah.
It was good for both.
Yeah, that family connection so that they can help, I think that helps bridge that gap as far as helping support them at school, right? The parents not knowing what they don't know.
Right, and it's not secretive.
And then this is just, it's exciting, we have phenomenal libraries at our secondaries, and both of them applied and received the highest status possible for the school libraries, so that was exciting for both those. Genevieve Minor runs our library up at West Senior High, and Larissa Vandersee runs our library center over at Central High School, so.
How, are those annual or?
Yep, they're annual awards, and they've got to produce a lot of different documentation as to what they do to promote literacy, to support literacy, engage kids in different things. I know they run book clubs and like, how do they fill their collection, but how do they engage kids? How do they support kids? It's not just about, you know, the traditional academic goals, but it's about making a community space where kids feel like they can go there and it's a spot for them. Building that awareness for public libraries that we hope then lives on, you know, through adulthood, so.
So is this a new designation for our district or?
No, they've received it in the past, but I will say, just because we've received in the past doesn't mean that there's a lot of work that goes into
Right.
receiving these and ensuring that we have the programming in place, so.
It would be good to have something like that too to the board that's public.
Okay.
Don't you think? Because we get a public comment every single like clockwork that deals with library. And so how you do your book selection and how you do your book selection for weeding. Oh, the ins and the outs of the library.
I will never take librarians for granted.
Yeah.
I moved here from a district that had cut their librarian from the elementary school, and so they relied on a volunteer. Fortunately, she had the appropriate educational background, but not every community is blessed with that, so.
And both Larissa and Genevieve are teachers first, right? Like they both have worked in the classroom for us, but they're both really, you know, it's not just checking books out to kids. There's so much more that our libraries do to support reading and literacy. And, yeah.
And then last one here is in honor of Kindness Month, our central grade students went out with fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Wolfert, and did some notes of appreciation for their community. Kind of coincided with we had our visioning meeting that we went to for the central, we had some central grade school community members there. So it was nice to go door to door and deliver those, and I think that neighborhood really appreciated it.
Getting outdoors this time of year.
Yeah. Yep.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so I think with that, we are ready to go. This has been a long one, but very good. Appreciate the conversation and all the information you guys brought forward to us. Our next board curriculum committee meeting will be Tuesday, April 1st at Snow Foolin at 8:15 here in this building. And with that, we are adjourned.